This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney. What a lineup today. You're going to have to stay with us for 3 hours. It's an order. Out there on Apple CarPlay, on Android Play, on YouTube as well. We'll get to all that in a moment. Paul Sweeney, where do you begin? Which guest are you waiting for today?
I think we start off pretty strong here with Max Kettner, Chief Multi-Asset Strategist, HSBC Global Research.
Right.
He's in London. He'll be joining us in just a moment.
Elizabeth Economy in the 9 o'clock hour on China. That is absolutely definitive. Edward Ludlow will join us after his conversation with Jen-Hsun. He runs a small tech company.
Yep.
And one M. Dell of Austin, Texas. Good morning, Michael Dell, if you're listening in the early Texas morning. Program note, it's 7:15. Jurrien Timmer of Fidelity will join us. And I'll give you one big tease right now. He has my slide of the second quarter. You know he's brilliant, and he has one slide you want to stay with us for to get to 17. I'll lead that conversation with that important slide with the gentleman from Fidelity. Futures up 2, Dow futures up 9, mixed markets dead. We're just waiting for the Carol Tim Nvidia announcement.
Yes,
right?
Carol Massar, Tim Stenovic, they'll bring that to you when the news breaks here a little past 4 p.m. today. It's going to be a big issue. Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It'll be a big thing because I think, Tom, the market has been really focused on technology as a driver of this marketplace, and AI spending as a big driver of technology.
Should I go out and get the new Microsoft laptop? I mean,
think maybe.
Tell the Red Oak keeper of the Amex and say,
pop it
slide
right on
over
there
to the Microsoft store on Fifth Avenue. And it's got Chat GPT and.
Yeah, I also think you need a new iPad too.
We're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk to Dan Ives about it. The resolution on the new iPad is just simply shocking. There's no other way to put it. Shocking, as well as we're on Apple CarPlay and Android. Download the Bloomberg Business app. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Search for Bloomberg Podcasts, and you will find us there. 3 hours plus a replay. We get that out a few hours later. 2 hours, 56 minutes, and all the other goodies there of Bloomberg. Out on Bloomberg Podcast. It's our new distribution. Here in the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. And futures, little change. Investors waiting for tomorrow's results from Nvidia, which has really powered a large chunk of the S&P 500 earnings. Nvidia stock up more than 90% this year. It rose 2.8% in New York yesterday, sending the NASDAQ 100 index to another record high. Shares of Nvidia right now up about 0.5%. This morning, the focus, we're shifting over to retail for a bit. We have Lowe's up more than 1%, reported comparable sales for the first quarter that beat estimates, and that was thanks to a boost from professional contractors. And Macy's down nearly 1%. Profits beat estimates, and a turnaround is showing signs of life for Macy's. We're waiting for results from Urban Outfitters and also AutoZone. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.83%. That's down 2 basis points, and the 10-year yield at 4.42%, and that's down 1 basis point. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
And also, Paul, thank you, Lisa. I note Apple off the bottom, the April bottom, the gloom of April. When the Red Sox were in first place. Apple up 16%. There's something going on there.
There's something going on there, Tom. I think people feel a little bit optimistic about this June developer meeting they're going to have coming up in a couple of weeks. I did not get the invite, but I am assuming Ed Ludlow's got a front row seat there.
You can't go without the shoes with the white soles.
I know.
You got to have the white soles.
I
don't have those.
Even David Weston has the shoes with the white sole. Now, David Weston, to me, I look up to as a fashion kind of nameplate. Even he sports the shoes with the white soles and his suits. I don't know what to make of that.
So as the shoes with the white soles for men, the same as the red soles for women?
Maybe.
I think there is. I've seen Weston at Daniels. Okay. I've seen him at Daniels.
Okay. Yeah, with David Weston. He's a player.
Very cool. Also players Max Kettner of HSBC who joins us now. Max, give me the long call and give me the HSBC distinction of your enthusiasm on equities.
Yeah, good morning. Look, I guess things are still pretty fine in terms of the overall equity story, and that basically translates into these enthusiasm that we still have when we look, for example, at the Q1 reporting season, both in Europe and in the US. Look at the US, for example, the average earnings beat was around 8.5% to 9%. When we look at the 10-year average from before COVID, that was just around 4.5%. So we just came out of a reporting season where the average earnings beat was almost twice as high compared to the pre-COVID history. Like, what's not to like with that? We're starting to see a bit more earnings strength, broad-based as well, and all that really translates into that enthusiasm for equities.
The pedigree of HSBC is the asset class ability. You've got Steve Major on bonds. I guess I have bonds priced to perfection, upper decile spreads, price up, yield down. Are equities in the same place where they're like bonds, priced to perfection?
Yeah, look, I think we've seen that last week as well. When we look at the price action over the last, call it 4 or 5 trading sessions, when we look at the 2-year and the 10-year yield on treasuries, we're actually back to the levels where we were before the CPI report. So that sort of enthusiasm that came out with inflation is already out of the price on bonds, but it's not out of the price in spread products, whether that's emerging market debt spreads, whether that's high yield spreads, whether that is global equities across the region in equities. That enthusiasm is still in the price, and I think that's justified because for risk assets, it was really about the tail risk of another Fed hike. It was really about the tail risk. Will the Fed have to backtrack and do a 180-degree backflip and actually say, look, we're not going to cut at all. In fact, we need to raise further. That was really the risk for risk assets more broadly. And with that tail risk gone now, everything's fine, right? We're completely, really pretty much fine now. We're in a pretty good Goldilocks situation for risk assets then.
Hey, Max, you're the chief multi-asset strategist at HSBC. What asset do you like here the best? I'm asking you for a friend over here who's in triple all leverage cash. What asset do you like right here?
So we are in our asset allocation. We're maximum overweight in high yield credit. Wow. That I think is really the stuff that we like the most. We're sort of halfway overweight in equities. So we've got a broad sort of 50% overweight in equities.
They're all in.
We're also really like an emerging market actually now, both in equities and on the debt side. So both looking pretty good now. Why? Because when we look at rates positioning and when we look particularly at dollar positioning, the US dollar long positioning of CTAs, of sort of shorter term momentum signals, still really punchy on the long side.
Okay.
So I don't think there's an awful lot further to go for the dollar higher. There's actually a bit of a potential for the dollar still to weaken, and that should be benefiting emerging market assets here tactically.
He's channeling his inner David Bloom. I mean, HSBC's never given it up since David Bloom exited the door. Max Kettner is channeling an inner David Bloom.
So, Max, we think about this U.S. Federal Reserve here. How are you guys factoring the Fed here? I mean, I think we started the year with 6 rate cuts, kind of factored into market. Now, maybe 1 or 2. How do you guys think about it?
Yeah, pretty much what you said. Maybe 1 or 2, and I think that's totally fine. I think that's absolutely fine, because one thing that we've got to be really realizing, it's a different inflation story to where we were between 2020 and the first half of 2022. Most of that inflation was really a supply side story. It was about supply chain issues. It was about commodity prices going higher. It was about low income and low skilled labor wage gains really ticking higher. So it was really a supply side story that was weighing on corporate margins, that was weighing on growth. This now is very different. It's the inflation that is a result of really strong demand, of really strong growth. And that's positive. So as long as the tail risk of no hikes, as long as that is not materializing, it's totally fine if we see 1 or 2 or 3 hikes, 1 or 2 or 3 cuts. It really won't make a massive difference to risk assets.
Max, one more question. Part of your charm is you're over there, not here. How do you perceive tech exceptionalism in America as we go to Nvidia earnings? I don't mean a buy, hold, sell on Nvidia, but how do you perceive the whole tech AI moment?
Yeah, I think still from a structural perspective, great story, even from a tactical perspective. Let's be honest, when we look, for example, towards Q3 and Q4, when we look at the Magnificent Seven, for example, earnings growth is expected to be pretty much flat by Q3 and Q4 on a year-over-year basis. And it's expected that all the other stocks, the 493 stocks, are actually going to pick up the earnings growth story from then on. So in fact, earnings expectations for all these AI and tech stocks and the big mega caps is pretty low going into the second half, and therefore the surprise potential on the upside, again, very, very high. So to me, I think really still structurally, but also tactically, a really great story.
Rich, can we get someone more bullish than Max Kettner for the 7A? I mean, come on, we got to do better than this. Max, thank you so much. I can't say enough about it. To get his research note, look to HSBC. We protect the copyright of all of our guests. Coming up, Jurrien Timmer with our news in New York City. Here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. In Iran, the funeral of the late president has begun. Thousands of people line the streets of the northwestern city of Tabriz as the coffins of President Ibrahim Raisi and 7 members of his entourage were driven by. Another funeral service will be held in the holy city of Qom tonight, and then the bodies will be moved to the Iranian capital, Tehran. The president will be laid to rest Thursday. Iran's heads of state have set June 28th as the date for the election of a new president. Meanwhile, speaking on the floor, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell noted the history of the country leaves him little hope the relationship between the U.S. and the next Iranian president will be any better.
The untimely death of the president of Iran does not change the underlying threats this regime poses to its own citizens, to its region, and to the free world.
Iran's recovery teams reported the weather conditions were very poor in the region where the wreckage was found in Iran's rural mountains from the helicopter. Officials call a major milestone toward fully reopening the port of Baltimore, nearly 2 months after a container ship rammed and collapsed the Francis Scott Key Bridge. The cargo ship Dali has been moved away from the site. Executive Director of the Maryland Port Administration, Jonathan Daniels.
The refloating of the Dali and moving her to dock, which really begins to open up the channel in a way that can have a significant positive impact on the movement of vessels into and out of the port.
Maryland Port's Jonathan Daniels says within the next week, they should have the full channel open and available again. A defense witness in Donald Trump's New York hush money case, whom the judge threatened to remove over his behavior, will return to the stand today. Trump's lawyers are hoping Robert Costello's testimony will help undermine the credibility of a key prosecution witness, Trump fixer turned foe Michael Cohen. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
So you hit a home run, and then you hit a home run the next game, and then you hit a home run. I'm so glad. Thank you to ESPN for this. Mike Trout, who you'd expect this. You know, he did it, in 2022. Rafael Devers of the Boston Red Sox.
Wow.
6 games in a row.
Yes. Yeah, it really is nice. I mean, you got to give it to him.
It's rare.
Yeah.
I had no idea how rare it was.
How did they say it in the call? It's like, this man's not human. I mean, that is a feat. You got to give it up.
And there's no like funny ball or funny bats now. I mean, it's like legitimate.
Yeah.
6 games in a row. That's the high point for the Red Sox season. I'm watching
That
the
might be
Orioles.
it. When's the Cape Cod League start?
Cape Cod League is mad. Oh, you're going to get me going. I'm going to, folks, nationwide, it is the coolest thing.
Yep.
It is just, the Cape Cod League is the absolute best. We have a spectacular lineup coming up. Paul's going to tell you about that, but I just can't say enough about the excitement I have for the next 3 hours. Futures, red and green on the screen, VIX 12.42. Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by BNY Mellon Insight, June 4th to the 6th in Nashville, Tennessee. Don't miss the essential event for the financial advice community. Visit insight.bnymellon.com. All right, futures right now struggling a bit for direction. Today, investors looking for more comments from central bank officials. And there's plenty of it today, including the Fed's Thomas Barkin, Christopher Waller, John Williams, Raphael Bostic, Susan Collins, and Loretta Mester. Now, yesterday, Mester said she no longer supports 3 interest rate cuts this year. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.83%. That's down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year at 4.42%, and that's down 1 basis point. We have some tech news. Dell up nearly 1% right now. The company rolling out a new line of personal computers that are primed for artificial intelligence. Now, its CEO Michael Dell says AI PCs will be pretty much standard by next year. And meanwhile, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella says that new AI PCs, well, they're going to revive that rivalry between Windows PCs and Apple's Mac. Microsoft new AI-focused PCs are called Copilot Plus PC. And then sources saying ASML holding Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing. They've kind of reassured U.S. officials. They say they have ways to remotely disable their chip-making machines if China were to invade Taiwan. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Could you imagine, like Lisa Mateo, before they said you have to work with Tom Keene, and she wore black for a week.
Yeah.
And, you know, she thought Loretta Mester was in the movie A League of Their Own, you know, like the baseball movie. You just killed that news report. There's a lot going there, Lisa.
There's a lot going on.
I mean, Lisa spent her whole career on, general news doing real stuff, like real
Yeah,
stuff.
like
and
real,
then she came to Bloomberg and she had to learn all this business silliness that we do.
Yeah, you know, you're 100% right. It's very hard to do. The hardest thing to do, and of course we all learn every morning from Karen Moscow. I mean, she's like she invented it.
Yep.
I mean, she invented the cross-asset data check that you hear. And what'd you do, Lisa? I mean, they said you have to work with this idiot with a bow tie, and you went into training for like what?
I called
3
up Karen
months?
Moscow.
See, exactly.
Karen Moscow.
What do I do? What do I do?
What did Karen tell you?
She said, "Don't listen to what they tell you."
There you go. Yeah, very good.
Very cool.
She gave some amazing advice.
That was brilliant there. And on ASML really shows a whole tie-in here to the semiconductors. Paul Sweeney to brief out here on China with Elizabeth Economy coming up. I'm sorry, it all melds in together with the Nvidia report tomorrow, which is his U.S. supremacy and technology and the different threats to it.
And as Lisa she was mentioning yesterday in one of her reports, it was a year ago that we got that seminal revenue raise from Nvidia that caught everybody by surprise. Like, you don't take a revenue guidance of 13 billion up to 17 billion or whatever the number was at the time, like something crazy, and attribute it to this thing we loosely call AI. And now everybody said, oh my goodness, I need to pay attention to this. What is AI? Where does it go into tech stack? How do I play it from an investor perspective? And that's been the driver of this market.
A leg up here to the range starting in March. I mean, getting up near $1,000 a share. But what's amazing is if, the sort of the technical run of the mill is to do a weekly chart that sort of smooths out between daily and monthly. And the problem is Nvidia with a weekly chart is basically a moonshot. To be honest, Paul, it's elegant and under my fancy moving averages. I can't believe I'm saying this. We're at 947, and my support is 687. We could go down 250 points and still be in trend.
Yeah, I don't really know what to do with that. I mean, you look at this thing, and I'm just going over. Matt Miller's favorite chart function is COMP, comparative returns. You look at the Nvidia on a compounded annual basis over the last 5 years, up 90%. And just put that in perspective, Tom. The S&P is up 15%, which is phenomenal. That's where we live and die. But even the S&P, kind of the information technology segment, that's up 26%. So Nvidia is just blowing everything away. And what gets me even more is the fact that their earnings have increased more than right in line with the stock price. So the valuation, if you talk to some of these Nvidia bulls, they're saying there's not an evaluation problem here. There's not a valuation risk here. Earnings have really kept up with the stock,
the free cash flow is well. I want to get this in. I think it's so important, and particularly with Dan Ives coming up on use of cash, and the Apple lift, and we'll talk iPad and all that silliness. as well. My slide, I took a grab of it on the iPhone. You can do that,
look
folks.
at that here. Yeah, show that.
And it's Jurrien Timmer at Fidelity. And here's
Smart
the math. $225 of earnings, $75 of $225 goes to dividends, very linear, S&P dividend 1.35%, $90 to share buybacks. Good morning, Apple. That's a payout of $165. 73% of earnings are going back into dividends or share buybacks. And the one that's been religious on this for years, decades, has been Mario Gabelli, who's just basically saying, give me back the money. And that's what they're doing with share buybacks and dividends.
Yeah, I think, you think about a Mario Gabelli, and the focus there at Gabelli Funds and Mario Gabelli has always been, and a lot of investors, is free cash flow. What are you going to do with the free cash flow? You either pay down debt.
You see that at Warner Brothers Discovery as a pinata. At least they're paying down debt.
Exactly. You either pay down debt, you make acquisitions, or you return that cash to shareholders. And the question is, how do you return it, buybacks or dividends? And that's been the issue. And again, free cash flow, Mario Gabelli, he learned from Mel Karmazin, who was one of the great media CEOs of all time, kind of just preached free cash flow. Because that's really what pays everything. That kind of what drives growth.
I'm so glad you bring this up. And this is the encyclopedic knowledge of Paul Sweeney. What would Mr. Karmazin do in this time of streaming? Because he was a profit animal.
Yeah, and he was a profit animal. He was a free cash flow animal. I think he probably would have done what Rupert Murdoch did 4 or 5, 6 years ago, which is sell. Because he looks at the streaming business and he says it's such a ramp up to profitability that maybe let's let somebody else try to do that. I think I can maximize the value of my shareholders by selling. And so that's what we saw Rupert Murdoch do. But here, we're starting to see Disney's going to turn profitable in their streaming business this year. And some of the others we're seeing cutting their spending a little bit to try to get to that profitability number. Because if you look at Netflix, that P&L looks really, really good. Great margins, great free cash flow. So the streaming business can be a good business, but you got to get the scale.
Can I editorialize? And they had the courage after Showtime dumped Ripley to pick it up.
Well, I think if
they
Showtime
must have picked it up cheap.
Well, no, I think Showtime said, "Hey, where should we show this? Is it for our audience? Is it for somebody else's audience? It's a black and white period piece, blah 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 blah." And if Netflix wants to pay me a big dollar, I'll sell it to them because I'll make money from the Showtime, from the Netflix license. I still own the IP, so a year or two down the road, I can show it back on Showtime. I think they probably just, like a lot of content producers, are just saying, how do I maximize the value of my content? If Netflix wants to write me a big check, I'll sell it to them.
And it's removed here like Mank.
And by the way, I just finished my second episode of Ripley. Love it. Phenomenal. So check it out, folks.
Damien Sassar is all over it. He's, I look at Mank, which was Jack Fincher, the screenwriter, 4 or 5 years ago. Black and white, and you say, well, the public won't watch it. All I can say, folks, is take a try with the first frightening episode of Ripley. The black and white imagery, and it just gets better and better. They don't miss a frame through the whole thing.
No. And you film in Italy,
in Rome.
And it's just very Rome. I mean, it looks just phenomenal.
What's amazing? What's amazing about it? John Farrow's been to every single location in Ripley.
Yeah, of course he has.
I mean, it's amazing. Like, there's a point where they're at the town they're in, and like you literally can see one of the power boats that he rented.
Yes,
one of those George Clooney boats.
Yep.
Those fancy.
Yep. Well, that's John Farrow. He's a winner.
It's a Capri. I mean, he goes to Capri and
the Amalfi Coast.
The rest of it. What we're going to do is tell you about the guest list we got coming up. It's really extraordinary. We got Dan Ives. This is a really important conversation. I've been diving into not like a fanboy, but just curiosity. Okay, Apple iPads, so what? And the answer is it's getting rave reviews. We'll talk about that with Dan Ives. Elizabeth Economy coming up later, of course, with the Council on Foreign Relations. And
guess who we end the show with today, Tom? The David Gura.
And he's got a big take.
He's got a big take story.
That's really quite good. David Gura, he's got the same cough.
I can't believe we got him on the schedule. That's amazing.
Well, it's good. He's supposed to be down playing the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, but we got Gura. Anyway, stay with us. We're on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Podcasts. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts from New York City. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures. Let's take a look at some of the levels. NASDAQ future, the level is 18,754 Dow. 39,947. We have S&P at 5,333. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.82%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.42%, and that's down 2 basis points. Crypto prices climbing. Speculation the U.S. may be moving closer to approving ETFs investing directly in Ether. Right now, we have Bitcoin up nearly 2.5% at 71,189. Companies making news. J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon told shareholders at its investor day that the bank is, quote, well on the way with its succession plans. And Apple, sources saying that the company has challenged a £1.8 billion fine from the EU for preventing fair competition from music streaming rivals like Spotify. And finally, AstraZeneca. It said it plans to almost double sales to $80 billion by 2030. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
But the J.P. Morgan news, Tom, was the 5-year thing that Jamie Dimon always kind of jokes about. He says that's not a thing anymore.
Yeah.
Like it could be less than 5 years. That's what I took away from that.
Let's stop for a minute. You mentioned this earlier. Rupert Murdoch just turned 93.
I know.
And it's been underplayed, and I don't understand why. It's the most brilliant transactional event. I would go back to when they unloaded AOL on Time Warner. I mean, the way he unloaded Fox, Paul, was just extraordinary.
It was. I mean, he did not get top dollar, but he got well more than it's worth right today. And reminds me of Lowry Mays from Clear Channel Communications at the top, or not necessarily the top of the radio business, but well before the secular decline of the radio industry at Clear Channel.
We're going to take a measured conversation right now with Mr. Ives. Dan Ives is a piñata. He's senior equity piñata at Wedbush Securities. Everybody loves to hate him, and my problem is if I have a look at if I don't look at a daily chart or an every 15 minutes chart like Scott looks at over at the Death Star. Dan Ives, I'm looking at a monthly chart of Apple, and it is beyond elegant, bouncing off my long-term moving average at 166. It's up 16% in the last X number of days and weeks. First of all, Dan Ives, why is Apple up 16%?
Because investors are anticipating not just what's going to happen at WWDC, where they're going to release Cook and Cupertino, the AI strategy. But if you look at numbers coming out of, our Asia checks and others, you're seeing a stabilization of iPhone demand. And I think a renaissance of growth is now on the horizon for Apple.
Okay, I don't want to do a fanboy thing here, Dan Ives, but I'm absolutely blown away by the resolution from the M4 chip over to the fancy iPads. Wow. Are they going to cannibalize other Apple products, or are they going to stand on their own?
I think it stands on its own. Look, I mean, you've talked about this a lot. The chips, they beat Intel at their own game. And I think now you'll have a legit refresh on iPads, but it shows the power of those chips. And the important thing is that those chips, too, they're going to be able to ultimately navigate and deploy AI features within the broader Cupertino ecosystem. And that's why most are going to access AI in the future through an Apple device.
Hey, Dan, as Tom mentioned, this Apple's up 16% over the last period of time here, the last several days and weeks. What's the call on China these days? How's the market viewing the China, I'm going to call it a risk for Apple? How's the market digesting and discounting it?
Yeah, Paul, I think it went from a huge risk to what we've seen, especially our checks in Taiwan this week, stabilization to an uptick. So I think what's starting at, market's starting to sniff out not just a stabilization, but an uptick in China. And at that point, I mean, that's Cook drinking a mimosa, because then you now start to see an upgrade cycle take place with the biggest event we've seen in a decade with AI coming to Apple.
All right, so June, this developer conference, what should the market expect here? What do you think is going to happen there?
So I think, look, some are fearing it will be a hype event. I strongly disagree. I think this is the start of essentially what's going to be AI to developers. So it's really the start of a new AI app store from a services perspective. And I think the features that they're going to build in,
right,
not just their own, but OpenAI that they'll ultimately introduce, I think that's a partnership
right.
that's going to be exclusive and important.
One more Apple question. I really want to go financial, but I'm going to stay on the fanboy stuff. Dan Ives, what am I actually going to do with AI with Apple? If I've got the iPad and the Pencil Pro and I'm Mr. Artsy Fartsy, what's AI going to do for me where I look like I'm not making Popeye as a comic strip?
Well, first off, I think the big thing, especially with OpenAI and some of these LLM features, Apple is really trying to get you to almost bypass things like Google and some of the traditional search. But I think the biggest thing is just the features that you're going to see come out on healthcare, on consumer apps, on generative AI. It's all going to be apps. Developers are going to be building generative AI-driven apps on the iOS foundation, and that's the key. In the future, it's all going to be mostly through Apple devices. But that's what Microsoft's fighting this week. They want a piece of that from a consumer perspective.
And now the obligatory Nvidia questions, Paul Sweeney.
So Dan, I mean, Tom Keene's all about AI here. What should he be looking for tomorrow afternoon when Nvidia reports?
Oh, I think get the popcorn ready, get all set. Your favorite, beverage when they report. Because when the godfather of AI, Jen-Hsun, and Nvidia report, I think it's going to be another jaw dropper in terms of the demand that we're seeing. It's not slowing down. And I think we're just starting to see this acceleration. And that's important for the second, third, fourth derivatives within tech, which is why we believe this tech bull market has significant legs from here. But it all starts with godfather of AI, Jen-Hsun, tomorrow. I'm expecting another just drop the mic.
Yeah, I mean, he's going all existential on us with the third and fourth derivative as well. Where does Apple fit into the derivatives? I mean, they're not first or second derivative, are they? They're a follow-on from all these other people, right?
I think they're second, third derivative. Because when we talk about Nvidia, Microsoft, Google, ServiceNow, that's enterprise.
Right.
But on the consumer side, the chips and the actual use cases, how are they coming to the consumer? It's Meta, Google, but most importantly, it's Apple. And that's why now this is ready for prime time starting next month at WWDC. That's where the unveil starts. And eventually the iPhone 16 that will have their own AI features built in.
Hey, Dan, who goes to this? I mean, can Tom Keene get a ticket to this
I don't
developer
have a black
conference at
turtleneck.
Apple?
You can't go unless you have a black turtleneck.
Well, for Keene could get a ticket anywhere. Yep. So he's like, you almost have to exclude him. I mean, he's one of those exclusive, Monaco guy. But for the average, this is really for developers.
Yep.
It's for industry folks. That's really the focus of WWDC. What we'll be at.
What are you doing with your $250 price target? You're an outlier, but seriously, Dan Ives, some of the parts are earnings momentum as they come off the mat, up 16%. Are you ready to adjust that up so we can make some news this morning?
Look, 250's base case. I believe AI will add $30 to $40 per share to this Apple story over the coming years, and that's why I think $4 trillion will be what we'll be talking about in Apple a year.
Go first derivative. What's it do to Microsoft?
Oh, I mean, I think Microsoft they're right now in the leader seat from an enterprise perspective. I mean, if the Mount Rushmore of AI, it's Jen-Hsun, they're carving that out. Who's next to it? It's Nadella.
Can you see Mount Rushmore?
Yeah.
Jen-Hsun, Dan Ives,
Ed
totally.
Ludlow,
and Satya.
Right.
I mean, it would be too much.
That would be too much.
Dan Ives, I could just see you on Mount Rushmore. Thank you so much with Wedbush. You can send your hate mail to Mr. Ives directly, or I get the hate mail too. If you have love notes for Dan Ives, they go through Lisa Mateo. Mr. Ives is with Wedbush. He is enthusiastic on America's technology. We got red and green on the screen waiting for those Nvidia earnings tomorrow. Look to Carol and Tim for that. Yep. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. A defense witness in Donald Trump's hush money case will return to the stand today as the trial nears its end. Trump's lawyers are hoping Robert Costello's testimony will help undermine the credibility of key prosecution witness Michael Cohen. However, Costello angered Judge Merchan yesterday. Bloomberg's Jody Snyder.
After Donald Trump's team called their second defense witness, attorney Robert Costello, to testify, some of the things he said and some of the ways he said them upset the judge, Merchan, and he cleared the courtroom.
Bloomberg's Jody Snyder. The judge called Costello's behavior contemptuous. Costello ultimately resumed testimony. Singapore Airlines says one person was killed and several others injured after a flight from the UK to Singapore encountered severe turbulence in the skies over Asia and was forced to make an emergency landing. The carrier said in a statement, "We are working with the local authorities in Thailand to provide the necessary medical assistance and send a team to Bangkok to provide any additional assistance needed." The Boeing 777 had 211 passengers and 18 crew on board. One of the 5 Americans being detained in Turks and Caicos because ammunition was found in their luggage is talking. Tyler Winrick is speaking out ahead of his plea hearing later today.
I have a lot of fear and anxiety. The best outcome to this is that the judge will find leniency and compassion in the situation and steer away from that 12-year sentence and be able to give a sentence that is less than that and a fine, hopefully.
A bipartisan delegation of U.S. lawmakers traveled to Turks and Caicos to ask for leniency. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
And Michael Barr, thanks so much. Last week, Lucas Shaw joined us out with a weekend note that was absolutely definitive. In the sub-headline here, Paul, on this CBS Paramount thing, I'm sorry, it's CBS, it's not Paramount. 2 leading suitors for Paramount Global are both offering flawed deals. And down below in the paragraph 14 or whatever, Lucas basically alludes that Apollo hasn't really made a legitimate offer yet.
No,
I'm confused.
This is an ugly process. Having run many sales processes or been involved in many sales processes in the past, this is ugly. We have no credible bidders. At all, in my opinion. We have no financing out there for the bidders that are there. And you've got no deal, despite having the control shareholder in a company willing to sell. And again, I kind of joke, but I don't. But as recently as 5 years ago, this company could have been sold at a premium valuation with 2 or 3 phone calls at the most. No due diligence. Just get it done. Now you can't get anything done here, and I'm not sure why, other than really nobody with a credibility wants to buy this thing. And I'm not just saying it's just Paramount; it's just traditional media in general. There's no strategic buyers out there. The financial buyers who I thought would step in, private equity, have not for whatever reason.
Because they've looked at it and they can't figure out where the marginal profit dollar is in the future.
Yeah. So
I just don't see it.
Yeah, and then you had the CEOs, kind of step down at the end of April, so you really have no real leadership driving the sale process here. So you're left with a controlled shareholder, Sherry Redstone, who's arguably has conflicted interests vis-a-vis other non-controlling shareholders. So it's really a very bad situation. And you kind of, for those of us who have been around this company for 30, 40 years, it's a little bit sad here because Sumner Redstone, I'm sure he did not want this.
Oh, I'll have to see. Warner Brothers Discovery again. Looking at it, we got some media types on here to help us out with this. It's a big part of our lives. And it's right now, I'd just say simply the customers driving the boat, not the financiers and the creatives as well. Futures flat. It's an amazing noodling market here, all of it waiting for the Nvidia splash. Tomorrow, maybe some economic data as well. We'll keep you in touch with that. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures this morning. We have over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.83%. That's down 2 basis points. The 10-year yield at 4.42%, and that's down 1 basis point. Over to commodities, spot gold lower at $2,420 an ounce. We have Brent crude at $82 a barrel, WTI crude at $78 a barrel. Companies making news, that's Grant Thornton laying off about 350 U.S. employees. It's moving closer to a PE deal. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. And we have some gaming news. Tencent suspended its Dungeon and Fighter mobile game within an hour of its China debut. That was due to some server glitches. Yeah, that problem there. But Bloomberg Intelligence does say it's unlikely to have a material impact on its earnings. And Nintendo has brought Shiver Studio to help add games to its next Switch console. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
I missed all that. I won't let
You're not
him
a
in
gamer?
the house.
Pong. Pong is kind of
Pong is about where
that's my high
remember
point.
Battleship? Battleship.
Yep.
You had to have a rolling rock in your hand
Yes,
while you
exactly.
played Battleship.
Absolutely.
As well. This is a few years ago, to say the least. Most important thing I heard yesterday, Paul, was always some Eric Balchunas. It's just brilliant. And I was thunderstruck at the size of the outflows from traditional active mutual funds. That's a lead story, folks, you're going to hear about into autumn of this year.
And it's going to be, it's just amazing how this ETF structure, this wrapper around managing money has become so popular because of a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the lower cost vis-a-vis mutual funds. But that's where all the money's going, Tom. And thankfully, we have people like Eric Balchunas to keep us up to date on what's happening.
To me, it's the whole thing with it is the consumer power.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
You know, there's a lot of people with suits and ties and bow ties and Chanel dresses walking around telling people what to do. And the answer is the customer's voting every day.
Yep, absolutely. And it's not just the index funds. I mean, there's ETFs for everything. Any way you want to slice or dice it, they're there.
No, we'll have to see.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front pages around the world. It's brought to you by IBKR Financial Advisors. Switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interest. That's at ibkr.com/RIA. ibkr.com/RIA. Interactive Brokers, a foundation to what we do here, including our newspaper segment. I glanced at least. This is a great lineup you got today. Where do you start?
Yeah, we're starting. This is an interesting article on the Terminal. You can check it out for yourself. Florida being hit by this surge in commercial property insurance bills. And because of that, it's causing a major issue there. I'll get to that in a second. I want to break down the numbers, though. In the 5-year period ending 2023, costs surged 125%. Last year, premiums soared 27% for the second year in a row. So because of that, more nursing homes, they're starting to close down each year. The cost of senior care is starting to rise. Two things are happening. So you have climate change, you have more, hurricanes, stronger hurricanes, and then you have the challenge of caring for an elderly growing population. So you have those things starting to collide together, and now because of that, there's this issue. Where are the elderly going to live? Because they all like, to go down to Florida for the warmer weather, lower taxes.
That was years ago. Do they want to go down there now? I don't know, because what I've seen is a couple good articles. I'll give the Wall Street Journal a shout out on this, on the exodus of middle-class people from Florida. They're going up to Georgia, North Carolina,
The low country,
Wake
that
Forest,
is beautiful. With Florida being threatened by more powerful hurricanes, commercial property insurance costs last year surged at nearly 5 times the national pace. That's a problem.
It's a problem.
Okay.
And if more of these retirement homes keep closing down.
I mean, Florida, they can't take all these people that have been coming down. I would think they'd have issues with schools or housing or resources, water.
I mean, somebody in the last 24 hours in the Zeitgeist had a whole thing on Coral Gables.
Yeah.
I mean, I looked seriously at Coral Gables about 7 years ago. It was really, I just didn't want to get out of the triple leveraged all cash fund. But the answer is Florida isn't Miami. Florida isn't just Coral Gables. And hedge funds and all the other the life of Mike McGlone.
Mike McGlone, exactly.
It's not just there's a whole nother floor.
Well, the thing is, it's hard to find a place. My mom's in Naples, and when she had to move places from one retirement community to another, it was hard to you're on waiting lists. I mean, it's hard to find a place.
Yep.
So with more closing down, not so good.
Hey, Lisa, I'm
You're
staying in Jersey. I'm staying in Jersey.
You're staying on the shore.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Next.
The highest paid CEOs of 2023. Okay, this is from the Wall Street Journal. They did an analysis, more than 400 companies from MyLogIQ. Okay, so they found that half of the executives made at least $15.7 million. That's a record for this survey. Several making about more than $50 million. The highest paid S&P 500 CEO in 2023 goes to Broadcom's Hock Tan, who made $162 million. There are certain stipulations, though. He has to stay in the job for 5 years, and Broadcom's share price has to reach certain targets after 2025 of October to get that full value. Then he was followed down by Palo Alto Networks' Nikesh Arora, and third, Blackstone's Stephen Schwarzman.
Every single year he's there, Stephen Schwarzman.
Is it appropriate to put equitized risk into compensation studies?
Tom, the scam, however you want to phrase it, the structures are basically stock-based compensation. It sounds good to shareholders. It's based upon metrics that can be, managed, whether it's cash flow, free cash flow, earnings, whatever. You can run your business to reach those metrics. To achieve those hurdles to achieve your stock-based at-risk compensation,
right.
And that's what corporate America and the boards and shareholders, quite frankly, have basically signed on to, and that's kind of where we are.
Those stock awards are growing their compensation packages. I'll tell you. This one you heard it come out. Scarlett Johansson.
I'm a huge Scarlett Johansson.
Me too.
Fan.
Yes.
I think maybe for different reasons.
Okay, I got you on that one. She has lawyered up. She's fighting back against OpenAI for a voice that she says sounds like hers. So the backstory is in September, she got an offer from OpenAI Sam Altman to be the voice of this audio feature for the ChatGPT, but she decided to pass on it. But then last week, OpenAI released these new tools that included this voice called Sky, and she says it sounded just like hers. Altman saying the voice is not hers. It was not intended to sound like her. They had a voice actor before even approaching her. OpenAI did take down that voice. It's called Sky. Replaced it with another voice called Juniper. But you see this.
So
it's this
they
battle.
replaced what she believes is her voice.
Yes, but the point is the battle that the strikes were behind it too. AI fighting these deep fakes. A lot of Hollywood actors.
How many lawyers will be employed for the next 5 years?
Oh my goodness,
that's true.
And looking at the Bloomberg reporting here, that Johnson has waded into legal issues in Hollywood before. In 2021, the actress sued Walt Disney, claiming the entertainment company broke its promise to release her latest film, Black Widow, only in movie theaters when it made it available for streaming. So
and good for her for doing
stay on
that.
top of it.
I haven't said this publicly, but OpenAI got in touch with me about 8 months ago, and they said, we'll pay you not to use your voice.
I was like, they're going to use your voice. Oh, okay.
No, they said, it's so bad.
Aww.
We'll pay you to go away. Thank you, OpenAI, for that. What do you got next?
Last one, Red Lobster. We told you it was filing for bankruptcy, right? But now everyone is flushing in. They want to get their last meals there, even take home a piece of nostalgia, some of the history from there. That $20 all-you-can-eat shrimp deal in June, it really killed them. But people love the affordable price for seafood that they can get there, and that's why people keep going back. They say they like the nostalgia. They had, family parties, birthday parties.
Yep.
And actually, Elon Musk did tweet that he was unhappy when he found out that they were filing for bankruptcy. He said, too bad, I have some fond memories from a long time ago eating at Red Lobster. So people have been trying to buy certain things when those stores close out, like some of the kitchen stuff. They want to buy the lobster tanks. So they want like a piece of the history because they say it's been part of their lives.
Did they go under because they were giving away shrimp? Come on, that's just too simplistic.
No. It had a lot more to do with it.
I think it was underlying real estate costs and labor costs and so on and so forth. But I mean, and then just people, I think their demographic has been kind of pinched a little bit at the margin. So
it did, but that was an $11 million loss for them, that
for the
$20 shrimp thing. for
Thanks
the
so
quarter.
much. It's the Tottenham sound. As the Beatles broke, somebody else broke. Dave Clark 5. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene amid a bull market. We welcome all of you. Nvidia earnings tomorrow. Carol and Tim will bring you complete analysis of that tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, just sort of waiting. Futures flat is the way I'd put it. Red and green on the screen. The VIX 12.46. Paul, it was our theme yesterday, but I'm sorry, the exuberance is an odd exuberance this time around.
It is. I mean, you don't feel many people just kind of, doing slam dunks here on this marketplace, and the market's been solid here.
Solid, I like
so
that.
far this year. I mean, and the earnings. I think the earnings have been the story over the last month or so. Earnings have come in generally very strong on this earnings cycle, and we've got a Fed that presumably will be cutting rates maybe a little bit later than people anticipated, maybe not as often as people anticipated, but still the expectation is for rate cuts.
We're going to go mid-cap in a moment. David Sowery likes to walk away from the Dow, from the pandemic low, up 100%, 26% per year, roughly, maybe a little less than that, off the 2 Octobers ago low, up 32%, off last October, just now, up 25%, getting up near the highs that we're seeing in 2021. We'll do that here in a moment. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning brought to you by CohnReznick. Advisory Assurance Tax, CohnReznick's enterprise risk management solutions. They can help your company drive value through stronger compliance and reporting procedures. Visit CohnReznick.com. Thank you, CohnReznick, for really original commitment to what we're doing here as well. We're on Apple CarPlay, Android Play as well. And we're also out on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Podcasts. There's a live chat. It's very cool. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. There's a Good Morning Mexico City out on...
Really?
We have there's one guy's a Met fan. I don't know. I didn't know we allowed Met fans.
Sure, they come in. They need all the love they can get.
Now, yesterday I missed going to the Bloomberg Business Flash at the beginning of the 8 o'clock hour. I was put in the timeout chair.
Oh, boy.
The Sparta time. You have to sit in a corner up in the food court.
Because we didn't get to Lisa Mateo for the...
I didn't get my 10 a.m. tang.
Yep.
It was a timeout chair. Boy, did I learn my lesson with our Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And futures are little change. Investors are waiting this week's results from Nvidia. Comes out tomorrow, which really powered a large chunk of the S&P 500's earnings. Nvidia stock rose 2.8% in New York on Monday, sending the NASDAQ 100 index to another record high. Shares right now, they're up about 0.5%. This morning, the focus shifting a bit. We have retail earnings. We have Lowe's. They're up more than 2% right now. Reported comparable sales for the first quarter beat estimates, and that was thanks to a boost from professional contractors. And then you have Macy's. They're up nearly 4% right now. Profits beat estimates. It's pushing the company to raise its outlook for the remainder of the year. And it really draws that question whether could it lower their interest in the buyout offer from Ark House Management and Brigade Capital Management. We shall see. We're also waiting for Urban Outfitter and AutoZone. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.83%. That's down 2 basis points. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.42%. That's down 1 basis point. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Program note, BitDog, 71,000.
What?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. It was just down to 63. You blink and this thing moves.
It's just amazing. I'm up, getting my first sank of the morning in the food court, and there's McGlone. He's got his laptop open.
He's just...
And he's just like sliding in.
Exactly.
It's just amazing.
He and Matt Miller are just kind of coining it.
71,000.
There you go.
Never have I been so wrong. Well, that's not true. Different story. David Sowerby joins right now with Ancora. Always important. I cited the Vanguard, the mid-cap returns here. David, just to begin with here from the tech frenzy, is the market broadening out?
Slowly. The rubber band is still very tight, Tom. If you look at that Magnificent Seven, trades at still a significant premium over the rest of the large cap stocks, even more so to small and mid cap stocks. But the market is starting to broaden out. And we saw after 2000, when the rubber band snapped, you went on a 7-year run where small cap, mid cap, and the equal weighted S&P index were the places to be.
Like Paul, the top 3 holdings, and this is the Vanguard mid cap. I could pick any of the else as well. It's very indexy. Amphenol, Transdigium. I don't even know what I'm looking at. It's like Constellation Energy, Cintas, Motorola Solutions, and Packard. It's not.
I love those.
We spend 90% of our time. What's Nvidia going to do?
I know. Tom, we need to get to the Midwest some more, get rid of the industrial America.
Yeah.
So, David, Tom keeps telling me that free cash flow is important. How do you guys look at free cash flow in your investment analysis?
It is probably the most important metric. I was listening to the show with both of you earlier this morning. You're talking about Gabelli, free cash flow. With that free cash flow, return it to the shareholder. That is always the ultimate quest that we're looking for. And companies are returning about 70% of that free cash to the investor, either via dividend increases or share buybacks. That's a very healthy rate.
Right.
That sets a good backdrop for the market.
And that's Jurrien Timmer of Fidelity with that great chart. Thank you for that, David Sowerby. I believe Mr. Timmer will be with us at 8:45.
Good.
That's what we'll be talking about, use of cash.
Very good. How about this company, Front Door? FTDR is the ticker, based in Memphis, Tennessee. They got 1,700 employees. Tell us about this company.
They do exactly what I embellish. I'm a check writer. I can't fix anything in my house.
Join the club.
So they do repair and replacement contracts for refrigerators, garbage disposals, dishwashers, doorbells, you name it. They've doubled their free cash flow in the last 2 years on a valuation basis at a 7.5% free cash flow yield. That is a wonderful valuation relative to the rest of the market. That's what Front Door does, a doubling in free cash flow, very good earnings out of the most recent quarter.
Paul, Amphenol, Wallingford, Connecticut, 95,000 employees, 5-year net dividend growth of 13% per year, dividend growth 13% per year. And would you like to make 18% per year on electronic connectors?
I guess. I don't know. I mean,
Apple,
I've
Nvidia, Microsoft, Apple. It's like, the Ed Ludlow world doesn't matter when you've got David Sowerby.
I mean, $80 billion in market cap for Amphenol. Go figure. So what do you make, David, of this most recent earnings cycle we've been through? It seems like earnings for corporate America came in pretty darn good.
They did, Paul. Up 7% year on year. I think it's up 10% if you exclude the volatility in energy. If you listen anecdotally to the companies, they're on the right diet. They are talking about being judicious on their capital spending. They're not overspending on CapEx. They're generating that healthy free cash that's going to grow nearly 10% this year, grow the dividend close to 10% this year, both large cap, mid cap, small cap. Pretty good. I'd give it a solid B+ out of this Q1 earnings. Companies are saying the right thing and being judicious with their cash and their capital allocation.
David, mid-cap stocks, when I heard you were going to be on, this is the question I wanted to ask. Mid-cap stocks, do they allocate capital differently than the ginormous stocks we all know?
I think a good CFO transcends, and a CEO transcends whether you're Nvidia, you talked about Broadcom, down to the small cap range. If I'm sitting across the table and listening to a CEO and CFO talk about cash flow from operations, capital allocation, that's certainly what's going to keep me very attentive. I think they're just as good at capital allocation as large cap companies. Maybe they have a little more stress on the balance sheet with their debt, but that's immaterial compared to what I think the prospects are going to be.
Tom, we have David Sowerby on. I use the DES function all the time when David's on because the stocks he lists on his sheet, I've never heard of. Master Brands, Jasper, Indiana. Tom, have you been to? I've never been to Jasper, Indiana. I couldn't find it on a map. Master Brands, stocks up 50% over the trailing 12 months. David, what does Master Brands do?
Cabinets, whether it's for the kitchen, the bathroom, other parts of the house, $2 billion market cap.
How do you find these things?
Two analysts follow the company. One of our most important factors is we're going to look for spinoffs. We're also going to look for underfollowed stocks before they go in the Russell 2000 rebalance. That's really one of the key factors. Master Brand, just a couple of analysts who follow them. When you have a longer-term reputation in the small mid-cap space, you often get those phone calls and you're able to dig into those underfollowed stocks before they go into the Russell 2000.
David, thank you so much. David Sowerby with a mid-cap brief, always valuable with Mr. Sowerby. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, Paul, Lisa, thank you very much. France and Belgium have released statements supporting the world's top war crimes court and its chief prosecutor's request for arrest warrants for leaders of Israel and Hamas after Israel and the United States both harshly condemned the effort. International Criminal Court Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan announced his intention to seek warrants for both Israeli and Hamas leaders whom he accused of war crimes. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
To seek arrest warrants against the democratically elected leaders of Israel is a moral outrage of historic proportions. It will cast an everlasting mark of shame on the international court.
Meanwhile, President Joe Biden says he sees no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. Days of funeral ceremonies have begun in Iran following the deaths of President Raisi, the country's foreign minister, and others in a chopper crash Sunday. One person has died on a flight hit by severe turbulence. The Singapore Airlines flight from London to Singapore was hit by turbulence before it was diverted to Bangkok. More than 30 others were injured during the rough flight. Martin Gruenberg will step down as head of the FDIC. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has details from Washington.
Findings of a toxic work environment put the regulator at the center of a heated political fight and fueled calls for his removal. Gruenberg has faced mounting pressure following a scathing report detailing allegations of harassment and discrimination, finding a misogynistic workplace culture at the FDIC, and raising questions about Gruenberg's leadership. Gruenberg says he will leave after his successor is confirmed. He's been with the FDIC since 2005. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Jasper, Indiana. Good morning, Indiana. Good morning, West Lafayette. It's our, we've got board members of the team there. Jasper, Indiana is 21 miles from French Lick, Indiana.
I know French Lick.
And I'm sorry, forever, French Lick, Indiana, which is on, my eyes are failing me here, on Route 130 or 150, down from Longtree. I mean, it is about Lawrence Bird.
Yep.
And Michael Barr, I mean, we forget about the basketball of old. Those people invented what we see today.
Yes, and I have to say it. There's something else that's very important that's happening in Indiana over the weekend.
Oh, please. What would that be?
Yeah,
I know what it is.
One word, Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
The 500.
Does it
That's
still have the
Memorial Day
cachet?
weekend.
Does it still have the cachet that it's always had?
Oh, yeah. I mean, think of it. 3 races. You got Monaco that morning, you have Indy midday, and then you have the Coca-Cola 600.
I'm going to cut Indy some slack. Fact, I turned off the Formula One this weekend in Italy. It's boring. Indy's never boring.
Indy's you're right about boring. That. Yeah.
Never, ever boring. Futures up 1. Dow futures up 21 from New York City. Bloomberg surveillance.
and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Little movement in futures. Let's take a look at some of the levels. The NASDAQ, 18,740, Dow, 39,965, and the S&P, 5,332 before the bell. Over to the bond market, the two-year yield at 4.83%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.43%, and that's down 1 basis point. Crypto prices climbing. Thoughts the U.S. may be moving closer to approving ETFs investing directly in Ether. We have Bitcoin up 2.5% at 71,293. Few companies making news. J.P. Morgan, you had CEO Jamie Dimon telling shareholders at its investor day that the bank is, quote, well on the way with its succession plans. That 5-year retirement may not be going anymore. Apple, sources say the company has challenged a £1.8 billion fine from the EU, and that's for preventing fair competition from music streaming rivals like Spotify. And finally, according to Oxford Economics Global Cities Index, New York, London, San Jose, California, the world's top cities. That list ranks the world's 1,000 largest urban economies. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. I appreciate it as well. We're taking a little bit of foreign exchange tech, but really equity tech. But we've got to focus now on coupon and on clipping a coupon, finding a coupon, or actually looking for total return. And you can visualize this on radio. We don't need this on YouTube, but the answer is from the Volcker yield to worst of 16%, maybe 15% on a moving average basis. We've come down over 40 years to about 2%, and then we've exploded higher. Price down, yield up in a bond market. For perspective, Vishal Kanduji joins us right now, head of broad markets fixed income at Morgan Stanley, a really holistic omnibus view of finding yield. We are out on yield to worst more than a medical chart. We're out 4 standard deviations, 6 standard deviations from long time. Can you state now that there's a turning point and we're going to see a recovery out 3 years, out 5 years of price up, yield lower?
Absolutely, yes. And I think that's what excites us. Thanks, Tom, for having me on. I think 3 basic things define the setup in the bond market, and you did it very eloquently this morning as well, where we know from the data that we collect, the components of inflation that we are looking at, that even though bumpy, the inflation is trending down. So we are changing quadrants from very high growth, very high inflation into stable growth, low inflation. Point number 2, fundamentals on the corporate and consumer market. Yes, there are some yellow and orange and red signs in certain parts of the market, but broadly, I think those balance sheets are doing really, really well. So fundamentals are still very strong. And then the math is compelling. I think 7.5% sort of yield in a diversified investment grade portfolio with, you run the math, 94% probability that it has a good correlation to total returns 3 years out. So those are the 3 basic assumptions that we are running with, and it excites us quite a bit from an active fixed income.
I mean, I look at the INGO function, the Bloomberg Index Browser. Fixed income got crushed in 2022. Worst year, like even before your time, my friend. 23, November, December bailed you guys out. And this year, nothing really to write home about. Where do you guys see opportunity here, I guess? I mean, do I just stick with Tom Keene and 2-year Treasury at 4.83%, or do I take some credit risk?
No, definitely tough slog. The only consistent thing over the last probably 24 months or 36 months has been the narrative shifts that we've gone through. And that's because I think the inflation, the quadrants were moving so quickly, and the Fed was trying to catch up on it. 2022, again, a watershed event. I'm sure we'll see it in textbooks going forward in the next 2 decades about how that broke away, the 85-year correlation chart. But we are coming off from that. Starting yields, again, a very clear and mathematical barometer of what your total returns should be looking like for fixed income market going forward. And that's what excites us at this point. Fundamentals being strong, technicals being very, very strong at this point. And then I think starting yields, the math is very compelling at this point. So
I'm sure everybody listening or watching worldwide are saying, wait, he just said 7.5% coupon. How do you develop a 7.5% coupon with a 4.x% full faith and credit? What are you buying to generate a gross 7% plus yield?
A good question. I think portion of our portfolio is still in the ballast, which is government-backed assets where we have treasuries and agency mortgage-backed securities. Again, after probably about 7 years, we are liking agency MBS that apart from negative convexity, it's giving us some yield and coupon and total return potential. So that's our ballast of the portfolio. That's one part. And then the other part that we are very overweight at this point is we are moving some of our investment-grade corporate exposure, the single-A corporates, which from our point of view have gotten fair to rich at this point, into securitized credit. Whether it's BBB CLOs that stick out to us is cheap, some loan exposure, you get pretty good current carry on that side. And then non-office CMBS. I think CMBS is still a very broad brushstroke, what the market has painted it, but we find a lot of values there. Bonds backed by a fantastic, hospitality or a Hilton portfolio backing it. Those are the cash flows that we are likely
Where are
to
you
get
on
back.
the Sternlicht debacle as published? This is all rumor and speculation, but the idea of the REIT debacles and the heated debate over Blackstone, we're not part of that debate, but it's out there right now. It's a delicate issue. Where are you on the veracity of the Sternlicht or Blackstone future?
I think we do think that there are structural issues in that market. I think the mark-to-market is not yet reflecting the reality of what office CMBS could be going forward. Again, we are public fixed income investors in our portfolios, so we constantly look at what the public fixed income market is offering us, and then that market has not yet adjusted. Maybe the privates and the loan market has from that end. So we are staying away at this point, being very patient. At some point, the value will become superbly attractive to us to get back in, to earn that extra coupon and total return potential. Idiosyncratically, we are seeing certain opportunities pop up in certain, whether it's San Fran or parts of New York City as well, but we are not making it as an asset allocation trade in our portfolio. It's very idiosyncratic still.
How about high yield? I've been kind of surprised to see high yield's been such a good performer over the past, year and a half, 2 years, and despite all the talk of people talking about recession here, recession there, high yield's been the place to be. How do you guys think about that? Do I take that kind of credit risk?
I think very good fundamentally. Again, our framework has always been fundamentals, technicals, valuations. I think fundamentals are strong. Technicals are extremely strong right now. And when we say technicals, it is that power of the yield buyer that is dominating right now. It's almost like pricing out some of our spread buyers in the market where we look at relative value on a spread basis. So if you look at spread basis, BBB to BB is the least in the last 20 years, the pickup or the return potential. Right. So yes, from that metric, it looks a little fed rich. But then if you look at a yield basis, it looks pretty attractive.
Yeah, but the heart of the matter is there's a wall of money out there. I mean, where does that money, come on, it doesn't go into Nvidia shares, it goes into the Morgan Stanley bond world, right? I mean, that's the reality.
I would selfishly and from my vantage point say yes to that question, and we've seen that move. I think that's where the patient long-term investor has started to make their moves. And we saw a glimpse of it, a rush in November, December. Last year, and we continue to see that. We've priced $680 billion of investment-grade corporate. Spreads are tighter, yields the same, total excess returns are positive.
Right.
And that is the money that is driving.
I got 30 seconds. Are you on speaking terms with Jim Caron? I mean, do you guys even agree at time to time?
We love him and agree, and we sometimes agree to disagree as well. So
does
Jim
he
Caron
force you to talk
friend.
physics? Does he force you to, like S equals VOT plus 1 mgt squared?
We do get into some of those Newton laws sometime, but yes, he's been
Newton's
fantastic.
Laws, okay. Isaac Newton, folks, will be with us next week. Vishal, thank you so much. Vishal Kanduja working with James Caron over at Morgan Stanley. I learned a lot there. That was really my duration's
these Morgan Stanley fixed incomes, they're all the old Eaton Vance dudes.
Yeah, they are.
I didn't know that. Very good. That is deep Boston.
That's deep Boston.
Yeah, you're going serious Boston there, folks. Money management.
You go to Boston Racket Club, and then you go down and you talk to Eaton Vance about tax-advantaged funds.
That's how you do it.
Morgan Stanley. It was a James Gorman presentation.
Yep.
Red and green on the screen. You got to stay with us. Elizabeth Economy in the next hour on China. Must listen. From New York City on YouTube, search Bloomberg Podcast, subscribe. Bloomberg Podcast. It's Bloomberg Surveillance.
All right.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures kind of struggling for direction this morning. Today, investors are going to look to more comments from central bank officials, and there's a lot of it. You have the Fed's Thomas Barkin, Christopher Waller, John Williams, Raphael Bostic, Susan Collins, and Loretta Mester. And yesterday, Mester actually said she would no longer support 3 interest rate cuts this year. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield at 4.83%. That's down a basis point. The yield on the 10-year at 4.43%, and that's down 1 basis point as well. Some tech news. We'll start with Dell. They're up about 0.5% right now. The company rolling out a new line of personal computers. They're primed for artificial intelligence, and its CEO, Michael Dell, says AI PCs, well, they're going to be pretty much standard by next year. And then you have Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. He says new AI PCs, well, will revive the rivalry between Windows PC and Apple's Mac. Microsoft has its Copilot Plus PC, and Microsoft is up about 0.3% right now. And sources say ASML Holdings and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, they've reassured U.S. officials. They're saying they have ways to remotely disable chip-making machines if China were to invade Taiwan. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Elisa Mateo, thanks so much. Our economic indicators at 8:30 through the week, through the month, on to the Fed meeting June 12th. Economic indicators brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. I have been in wide anticipation of this conversation. As you know, with the U.S. drive time, we're very U.S.-centric. There's a whole other world out there, and it's ascribed, Lisa mentioned ASML, and there's other giant companies of Europe. But for so many of us, it's the restructures years ago of Nestle and Unilever and that. Beata Mente is with Citigroup. She's their Euro equity strategist and joins us. And it's just simple. Beata, those charts don't look like American charts from the lower left to the upper right. When does Europe, and particularly large cap Europe, get its act together?
Hi, Tom. About at the start of the year, when we started to see a huge narrowing of the equity markets into this large cap growth, which we were always saying that it was a catch-up versus what has not happened in Europe the year before in 2023, right? So the US has narrowed into the Magnificent Seven. The European equities haven't. So at the start of the year, we've had this narrowing into large caps in Europe as well. We think this is mostly over, and the next step for Europe is broadening, which is a more natural way for Europe to outperform.
You have the advantage of massive Citigroup securities analysis. I'd mention just as one point of that, Catherine Mann sitting with the Bank of England right now. Beata, when I look at the managements of European corporations, are they as focused on capital allocation and use of cash like American corporations?
More and more so. So the markets, the last decade of the market preferring payouts has forced European companies to start follow the suit of the US companies. But of course, it's a bit different pattern, right? So the distribution of capital to shareholders is like through the buybacks, is through different parts of equity markets in Europe, is through the parts that actually are the biggest dividend yielders as well. It's just through the value, not through the growth. So of course that bodes better for what's ahead of us.
I mean, Paul, to be honest here, I look at Unilever, and folks, this is just my ancient history of studying these things, and they had a huge restructure. Yep. I'm going to say 20 years ago. They got 128,000 employees. Wow. They're popping next to no dividend growth. They pay a 3.45% dividend. Nice. Great, but it's not growing. The free cash flow is not growing, and the stock's a single-digit performer over the last 10 years. I don't get it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you do there. I mean, so Beata, talk to us about inflation and disinflation and the impact on profit margins for European companies.
Absolutely, and inflation and disinflation has very much to do with the previous topic of distributing capital to the shareholders. We can come back to that later as well. So basically, the last bear argument that is out there among the investors is surely inflation has helped so much earnings for the corporate sector, for the listed companies, and has shielded the margins, boosted the margins higher, right? Surely now that it's rolling over, it's a bad sign. So, of course, there are some reasons to be worried, but there are some reasons to be cheerful as well. To be worried, if you want to be worried, you could argue, yes, costs remain strong because there is still wage growth, right? While companies no longer have the pricing power that they've had last year or the year before. Right. So these are the negative signs. But on the positive side, really, profit margins only collapse when you have an EPS recession. That's not on the horizon at the moment. That's, if anything, we see signs that EPS could be upgraded going forward, not downgraded, right? So we see upside in the organic growth, and we see upside overall through most of the sectors on the volumes, which offset this negativity on the cost and pricing power, which means profit margins will be up this year, but within the sectors there'll be more pressures than on the other sectors.
All right, so what sectors should we be looking for here coming out of the European markets? I know there's not a tech-heavy component to the European markets, unlike the U.S. markets. Where do you guys at Citi see opportunities in the European markets?
So for Europe to outperform, and this is our view, so the continental Europe is one of our overweights now in the global portfolio. You really need the broadening. So the outperformance of Europe year to date, as I've mentioned at the beginning, was not a very conventional outperformance through the narrowing. If the market broadens, and it's really the broadening of the market performance has to come from the broadening of the EPS performance, which what we are starting to see post the reporting season. So broadening happens into the cyclicals, and it's not going to be through obsessing only about value or only about growth. Our view is that the fact, well, great that inflation is coming down, but our view is that over longer term, inflation will stay with us, and it's a game changer for the cyclical markets like Europe, for example, right? So we like deep value cyclicals, like basic resources, but we also like the growth cyclicals like tech or luxury goods or industrials, for example.
Yeah, an unfair question, but I'm going to go there. You got political turmoil in the Netherlands. You got France distracted by the Olympics, etc. Which nation has a dynamic to a better capitalism right now? Which is the nation that will be more equity friendly 3 years, 5 years out on a relative basis?
It's indeed a very tricky question. And overall, these geopolitical tensions, it's something that we've been seeing on the rise, right? And if you put it in the context of the big election year that we are going to have ahead of us, and actually we are also going to see European parliamentary elections earlier in the month. So that space is going to be really interesting. But bottom line is, when it comes to the equity markets, the individual countries in Europe are very skewed to the big companies that the indices own, right? So Denmark is healthcare, Holland is tech, France is luxury goods, right?
Yes, it is. Beata, thank you so much. Beata Mate with us with Citigroup. There, Paul, I look at the DAX, and the DAX index coming off the pandemic low, up 119%, off the Yardeni Ankampora low of October 2022, up a solid 50+%. There's some real movement there, as Beata said, finally. But on a relative basis, particularly for Americans, I need to be sold that Europe's going to give me something different.
Yeah, I think Germany's fascinating, and I learned a lot, talking to Matt Miller over the years, because he spent so much time there, and they have a kind of a double challenge here, double headwind, which is energy. They were so dependent upon Russian energy, number one, and that's obviously a challenge now. And number two, they export a lot of stuff to China.
Well, there's the China bit. We'll talk to Liz Economy about that in the next hour. Bloomberg Surveillance brought to you by Interactive Brokers, their bond marketplace. Access their vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities. No markups, built-in spreads, no built-in spreads, and low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. A little red on the screen. Awake to the tape is how I would put that. The VIX, like a rock, 12.51, hasn't moved like a week.
No, it hasn't, and it kind of shows you kind of where we are here, waiting on economic data, waiting on some earnings data tomorrow after the close with Nvidia.
Yeah, where the real yield migrates up 2 basis points, 2.09%. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. A funeral procession was held today for Iran's president and foreign minister. Ibrahim Raisi and other officials were killed in a helicopter crash on Sunday. An election for a new president will be held June 28th. Bloomberg's Rosalind Matheson has more.
As expected, within 50 days, they've got to hold that vote. We know that we've got an interim president at the moment. The question is, does he become the lead candidate for the administration into election? Do they allow a pseudo-reformist candidate to run to try and get turnout? Because, of course, in the last election, the turnout was very, very low. Do they kind of allow the sense of a competition, even though really it's a very tightly managed process, to try and encourage people out to vote? But the real question, the longer term, is not so much the election, it's the longer-term succession for the Supreme Leader, Khamenei.
Bloomberg's Roz Matheson reports Raisi was seen as a successor to the 84-year-old Supreme Leader. President Biden lashed out at the International Criminal Court as it seeks arrest warrants for top Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, for alleged crimes against humanity. Karim Khan, chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court.
Unfortunately, these crimes continue to this day. Israel, like all states, has the right to defend its population. Those rights, however, do not absolve Israel of its obligations to comply with international humanitarian law.
3 judges will decide in the coming weeks whether to issue arrest warrants. President Biden, critical of the ruling, says he sees no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. Singapore Airlines says a person has died aboard and others were injured when a London-Singapore flight encountered severe turbulence. The Boeing 777 was diverted to Bangkok. The flight had a total of 211 passengers and 18 crew on board. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With the Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. On a daily chart, not a record high. On a weekly chart, Bitcoin, 71,190. I mean, there it is, weekly chart, new high.
A new high. I mean, it's just, we hit 73,000 there back in the day a couple of weeks ago. Couple months ago, but boy, the volatility here has just been extraordinary. And you talk to the Eric Balchunises of the world and talk about that spot ETF, spot Bitcoin ETF is big, and now there's talk about a spot Ethereum ETF. So you get the ETF discussion into the equation with cryptocurrencies, then it gets really interesting.
On a math basis, Paul, I want to run a regression on this, which you can do on the Bloomberg Professional Service. Back to 2017. And the least mean squared mathiness isn't there.
No.
It's just, I can run a regression on Nestle. I can run a regression on the Detroit Tigers mediocrity. I mean, there's things you can plot, okay? You can't, I don't know how you plot
Bitcoin in, January of 2017, let's call it less than 1,000. Here we are here at 71,000 and change. Yeah. How about that?
Eric Balchunas was quite good on it yesterday.
Yep.
Driving, I guess, I don't know. I'm not going to opine on this. I'm not qualified to. All I'm going to tell you is I believe off the screen, Bitcoin is up $1,700, $1,700, 71,000 right now. On Bitcoin, Matt Miller's probably retiring.
Exactly.
Like Thursday.
In the Westchester estate.
From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Not much movement in futures this morning. We'll head over to the bond market. The 2-year yield at 4.83%. That's down a basis point. The yield on the 10-year at 4.42%, and that's down 2 basis points. Over to spot gold, lower at $2,425 an ounce. We have Brent crude $82 a barrel, WTI crude at $78 a barrel. Companies making news. Well, a big bet from AstraZeneca. The company says it plans to almost double sales to $80 billion by 2030. Their ADRs are up about 0.3%. And Tesla shares down nearly 1%. The battle over Elon Musk's $56 billion pay package, it continues. You have a coalition of its shareholders urging peers to reject it, saying he's too distracted by his 5 other companies. And finally, the hype around Beyond Meat, well, it's continuing to fade. Carl's Jr., Del Taco restaurants no longer serving the company's plant-based beef at many of their restaurants.
Terrible.
The tragedy. That is your Bloomberg Business
thought I
Flash.
just heard in the
Do you have that in Mateo household? Do you have that?
I do not. I don't like it. I have to be honest. I'm
Okay.
not a big Beyond Meat fan.
But you will, I mean, folks, I mean, she's crazy health food conscious person here, unlike Tom and I. But you'll throw a good beef burger on the grill.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
I will.
That's what I like to hear.
That I'll go for.
All right.
I just heard a thought in the tri-state area. It was David Wilson.
Yes.
Who was expert in analysis of Beyond Meat.
He was our correspondent, our Beyond Meat correspondent.
We talked about Matt Miller's retiring with BitDog at 71,000. I just saw Miller walk by.
I know.
I think he's going to his gold watch ceremony.
Could be.
He's getting a gold watch.
Could be. Very good.
You know, this is Bitcoin
Can't get rid of him.
71,000. This is so important, folks. We mentioned this in the last hour. Jurrien Timmer is definitive at Fidelity without question. Look on LinkedIn. It's the best place to see this. The absolute smartest combination of economics and finance into charts, into technical analysis. And it's so good. I'm going to put this up for YouTube. I took a screen grab of my most important chart of the second quarter. It's, of course, from Mr. Timmer of Fidelity. Jurrien, it's real simple. Use of cash, earnings $225. I got a linear growth in dividends, $75, and I got $90 in share buyback. Corporations are generating 73% payout on those earnings of $225. Does that continue?
Yeah, and this is the reason why the U.S. trades at a premium to most of the rest of the world, because the share buyback culture is somewhat unique. I mean, it happens in other places, but the payout of 73%, which is actually below where it has been over the past decade or so, was closer to 90%. But if you think about it from a DCF, discounted cash flow model perspective, if you're a shareholder and you're getting more of the company's earnings returned to you in one way or the other, that commands a higher premium, right? And so that's why the U.S. has traded, more expensive, I guess, but it's well earned. And if the big free cash flow generators continue to generate that cash flow, then I suspect it will continue.
So there's this dovetail with Michael Mobison's work, which what's more important now is the annual payout along the continuum rather than the terminal rate insanity we were lectured on in school. Is the actual yearly payout that you describe more important than some phony calculation of terminal value?
Well, you're getting into the weeds of the DCF model, which is both so elegant and frustrating at the same time, because there are so many variables, right? You have earnings growth, you have the payout, you have the risk-free rate, and you have the equity risk premium. And it's elegant because you can explain the market through every variable, including sentiment, which I think the risk premium is a reflection of. But you also can never solve for 4 variables at once, and that makes it frustrating.
Thank you.
So you have to isolate something. So So the terminal rate versus the next 5 years growth, I just assume that it's going to be 6%. Right. The terminal rate is the 10-year Treasury yield, and then I solve for the risk premium because you have to isolate something.
Paul, I was in Boston near the State House, a lovely ornate 17th century State House, whatever, the red brick building there, and some guy next to me is going on DCF. Peter Lynch threw a snowball at him. He was so angry.
So Jurrien, I mean, I know a lot of companies, when they come through Boston, they come into the Fidelity offices to meet with you guys. When you're talking about use of cash, how do you, and I'm sure a lot of these companies say, hey, what would you like to see, dividends or buybacks, or what kind of mix? How do you answer that question for these companies?
Well, that's a good question. I guess it depends. I mean, dividends are sort of, like a sacred commitment, right? So if you're going to pay a dividend, you better not take it away. And buybacks are more variable, right? If you have the cash flow, buy back the share. Then the question is, do you buy back shares or do you spend it on CapEx? And actually, it's interesting that the CapEx as a percent of revenues has been increasing, and maybe that's part of the whole AI boom. But that's obviously good to see. But it comes down to the productive use of your cash, and if you're generating so much cash that even after satisfying CapEx, it's just sitting on your balance sheet, well, then you might as well return it to shareholders because that is part of the math.
How about for our good friends in Cupertino, Tim Cook, Apple? They pay just a token dividend. We've seen Meta initiate a token dividend. What do you say to the technology companies when they come through your offices about, okay, thank you for the gajillion-dollar buyback, but would a 3% dividend yield kill you? I mean, do you have those conversations with the big tech companies?
I think for the growthier companies, I think generally they have paid less in dividends than, for instance, a bank or a consumer staple, and I think that's just part of the structure of different sectors. And so, as long as it comes back, again, if the cash is used for a productive purpose, CapEx, whatever, R&D, then that's fine. If it's not used, whether it comes back as a dividend or as a buyback, I guess ultimately it doesn't matter too much. Probably a dividend would command a higher premium because it's less likely to go away. But for growth companies, I don't think it's generally expected.
Jurrien, a technical question, folks. Inside baseball here. Come with us. It's a global Wall Street question. Jurrien Timmer, the return on invested capital of Nvidia is 54%. The EVA spread, we're not going to go into the details now, is a mind-blowing 42%. If they migrate to trend, can their stock hold up?
That is a good question. You get into that super growthy space, and you start looking at not just the second derivatives, but the third derivatives, and so that's always a tough question. It depends on, how crowded the space is, what the valuations are. One thing I'll tell you is that, I've looked at this concept of the Nifty 50, and of course we're down to the Mag 7, but generally speaking, the Nifty 50, I've studied that very carefully, going back to the early 70s, which was the original Nifty 50. And when you see periods of these big growth companies really dominating, as we did in the early 70s and the late 90s, at the end of the day, those companies traded at a 2x multiple to the rest of the market. And today, the top 50 are trading only at about a 30% multiple. So maybe there's still some room to go because most of their performance has been justified by earnings.
Just great. Jurrien Timmer, thank you so much for Fidelity. Paul, this is the first time in history I've had two guests mention a third derivative.
Oh, boy.
In the same show.
I'm
Dan Ives and Jurrien
Yep,
Timmer.
Exactly. So that's what I got to look at.
Can I say good morning to Cornell?
Yes, absolutely.
High above Cayuga's
Serious
waters.
math people.
Fabulous math, world-class geometry. And you go first derivative, second derivative. We all learned that in Newtonian calculus. And in the XYZ space of differential geometry, it's called, are you ready? The torsion of the curve.
Wow.
This is, good morning to MIT and George Struick from 70 years ago.
Math.
But I'm sorry, Cornell. high
Yep,
above.
serious.
They
I
own
know.
it.
They are
They
serious.
invented it. Like the three-dimensional torsional geometry
Torsional.
of
You
the
got that,
third derivative. Next week we'll discuss the fourth derivative. Probably lose half our audience, but hey. We're on YouTube. Speaking of that, good morning to all of you. Oh, we're going to come on, kinks. Kinks. Never enough kinks. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Math class is in order. Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on economics, finance, investment, international relations, on calculus. Elizabeth Economy in this hour. Her first conversation with me since she's left the Department of Congress. Elizabeth Economy, a blistering essay in Foreign Affairs magazine. Must listen for anyone engaged in the Chinese debate. Futures -6, a bit of a weight to the tape. Don't want to make too much of it here. Not much economic data today. And Paul, I've gone down the wormhole here, the rabbit hole. I got people, every quant out there, everybody with an advanced degree. So the first derivative is velocity. The second derivative is acceleration, the way you go down the street. The third derivative, I didn't know this, is called jerk. Like, seriously, J-E-R-K.
Okay.
And that is the rate of change of the acceleration. Like you're going mental on 59th Street because it's so bumpy. And so you're accelerating, and then you hit the jerk. And the fourth derivative is called the jounce.
I'll take your word for it.
Okay. Just lost 2/3 of the audience on YouTube. We say good morning. Please stay with us on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. And, of course, search Bloomberg Podcasts to get us anytime you can. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. Brought to you by BNY Mellon Insight, June 4 to 6, coming up in Nashville. Don't miss the essential event for the financial advice community. Visit insight.bnymellon.com, INSITE, insight.bnymellon.com. And Paul, I hear you get your reservation at Pancake Pantry.
We do. We're all set to go. We got the Grand Ole Opry, Ryman Auditorium. We're all set to go. It's a big day.
Very good. Right now with our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And we've got red on the screen this morning. Investors waiting for Nvidia's earnings tomorrow. Shares right now of Nvidia are a little changed. The stock rose 2.8% in New York yesterday, setting that NASDAQ 100 index to another record high. So checking in with NASDAQ futures, well, we're down about 0.3%. We're at 18,705. Dow futures little change at 39,921. And S&P futures down about 0.1% at 5,324. Now this morning, we have a shift in retail, shift over to retail because we've been talking about tech so much. We have Lowe's. They are up more than 2%. They reported comparable sales that first quarter that beat estimates. And then you have Macy's up about 3%. Profits beat estimates. That pushed the company to raise its outlook for the remainder of the year. We also hearing from AutoZone, reported strong earnings for that fiscal third quarter, but same store sales overall disappointed. So those shares are down about 1% right now. We're waiting for Urban Outfitters. We'll keep you posted on that. And as far as the bond market, the 2-year yield at 4.85%. That's little change. And the yield on the 10-year at 4.43%. That's down 1 basis point. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Shout out BTIG. Thank you for the calculus lesson there. Greatly appreciate it. Anna Wong is like, God, don't ask me about the third derivative, please, Tom. But let's just go back to the Newtonian envy of economics. Anna, right now, what is the first derivative or the deceleration of inflation that you see out there? Is it describable? Is there a vector of disinflation in place?
Yeah, so we just heard from Chris Waller, who's just started speaking at 9 o'clock at Peterson Institute just now. And he said if he has to give a grade to the most recent CPI report, it would be a C+. It's not stellar.
Oh, that's just amazing. That's what I got in calculus, Dr. Wong. What a small world. Continue with the Adam Posen Chris Waller event.
So, yeah, he said so in terms of the first derivative, it's not accelerating. So that's why it's not a D or F, but it's not the level of that rate of change is not great either because it's 0.3. It's just not the most stellar CPI report. You need to get it down to a monthly pace of 0.2 to be consistent with the Fed's 2% target. So yeah, and I think another vector of the inflation first derivative story is what happens to productivity. And Chris Waller is one of the most, I think so far, if I have to give a grade to the forecasting prowess of Fed officials, I would give Chris Waller an A because he also said just 2 months ago that he think productivity has a level versus first derivative story. So level is zero derivative, right? And there are a lot of things boosting productivity level, which is the output per hour. But in terms of growth rates, there's still very little evidence to suggest that productivity growth has picked up, which means that there's with the latest productivity number we saw for the quarter, which is 0.3% growth, it means that there's still a lot of inflationary pressure in the pipeline.
You know, Tom, Anna received her PhD in economics from the University of Chicago, and I think those people like math.
But they like math, but they're not like slaves to math, like so many other schools.
I was told there wouldn't be math involved here. So, Anna, you know, talk to us about the labor market here. I kind of feel like it's tough for the Fed to cut rates when, I don't know, everybody's got a job, wages are going up. I don't know if the immigration factor is a thing. How do you think about the labor market? How do you think the Fed looks at the labor market?
Yeah, so I think the message coming out of the 44 Fed public engagement since the May meeting has been quite consistent. Really? That 45 people have spoken so far.
Speaking engagements?
You're the second person who asked me that question, and no, they don't.
Well, I'm a Wall Street person. I think money drives everything.
Public service is all about.
Oh, okay. I've heard about that.
Right. So I think the consistent message coming out from the Fed is there are two paths to rate cuts. There's an asymmetric bias toward rate cuts from the Fed's perspective. Number one is if inflation comes down, even without the labor market slowing down. And I think a lot of Fed officials think it's possible because they view the immigration factor as overall a free kind of disinflation for the economy. And the second path is simply that the labor market surprisingly slowed down. And interestingly, Waller today did point to evidence that the labor market is sort of slowing down.
We heard from Bostic yesterday, and Anna Wong, I say this with immense respect for the political economics, the social economics of Chicago. And the last question that he got from Mike McKee, and I thought he answered it brilliantly, was this aggregate tendency of economics across 2 or 3 Americas. Can you aggregate America's political and social economics now to a good macroeconomic outcome? Or are we so disaggregated in this nation, we've got to look at it piecemeal?
Yeah, I think there is definitely 2 or 3 Americas. Perhaps for economic forecasting, the most important demarcation is the 2 Americas, which is probably the 2080 rule. The 2080 rule just applies to everything, including even thinking about economics. So right now, top 20% holds most of the wealth gains from the pandemic. The excess savings are still present and alive with the top 20%, whereas the bottom 80%, not so much. However, in terms of forecasting the aggregate consumption, aggregate demand, it's interestingly, past economic research does shows that as long as the bottom 80%, the more wealth inequality you have, the more tendency for savings, precautionary savings to go up, and as a result, aggregate demand should eventually slow. Right. However, from the perspective of recessions and cyclical business cycle, it is the rich, the spending decisions of the rich who will drive the swings in consumption because they are the ones who have the discretionary spending to cut back.
Anna, thank you. Anna Wong with Bloomberg Economics, always very perceptive on where we are in economics, going to PCE the end of the month and on to other economic data, right to the June 12 meeting as well. You know, I look at this, Paul, and I just think aggregating right now, how do you aggregate with a haves asset class and a have-nots flat on their back?
Yeah,
I just don't get it.
No, it's an issue that I guess has always been out there, but boy, it just got so pronounced, I think, in the last, 15 years. I don't know. Maybe since the great financial crisis, maybe it's become a little bit more pronounced, but it's become a political issue, not just an economic issue.
Red and green on the screen. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Funeral ceremonies are taking place for late Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. the country's foreign minister, and others who were killed in a helicopter crash over the weekend. Iran will hold presidential elections on June 28th. In the U.S., National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby says even in dealing with the worst oppressors, the acknowledgement is for the people of Iran, not for the man.
This was a man who had a lot of blood on his hands. That said, as we in any other case, we certainly regret in general the loss of life.
The government blamed bad weather and dense fog for the helicopter crash. A flight from London to Singapore was hit by severe turbulence before it was diverted to Bangkok earlier today. Singapore Airlines confirmed one person died and more than 30 others were injured during the rough flight. Donald Trump is expected back in court this morning after an explosive day in his hush money trial. Trump's legal team called Robert Costello, a lawyer who advised Trump fixer Michael Cohen, to the witness stand. The judge furiously eventually cleared the courtroom yesterday and called Costello's behavior contemptuous. Costello ultimately resumed testimony. The embattled head of the FDIC, Martin Gruenberg, is stepping down following a report on a toxic work environment at the Bank Deposit Insurance Agency. Bloomberg's Jody Snyder has more from Washington.
He decided to resign. Said for a while he was going to, stay, and the White House had stood by him. But then he really lost yesterday. He lost Senate Banking Committee Chairman Sherrod Brown, who said new leadership was needed, and the political pressure was just too much. And this a key Democrat called out, but this was Sherrod Brown calling on Joe Biden to replace him.
Bloomberg's Jody Schneider reports the White House is promising to move quickly on a successor. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Michael. Amy Silverman, always interesting, RBC.
Yep.
Options, the dynamics of the market. An important interview yesterday with Bloomberg on Nvidia, and she just says the exuberance isn't there. Let me quote exactly. All eyes on Nvidia this week. We've seen a rally, but this time we do not see the same exuberance from options. Amy Silverman out on LinkedIn.
That's important.
It's important. I mean, she's really looking at the micro changes.
Yeah.
And all that.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, Nvidia stock up 90% this year, Tom, up over 200% on a trailing 12-month basis.
Yeah.
Market cap, $2.33 trillion in market cap. Again, this thing is tripled.
Yeah. I know you're going to sell Elizabeth economy here, but I gotta say, coming up, folks, is the interview of the quarter, if you will, on China. She's definitive. The book, The Third Revolution, Xi Jinping and the New Chinese State, was my book of the summer.
Okay.
Umpteen years ago, and she was shockingly prescient. I can't say enough about it. She has a blistering essay out with Foreign Affairs, her first statement since she assisted Gina Raimondo at Commerce.
Okay.
So this thing coming up is really special with Elizabeth economy. VIX 12.49, red and green on the screen from New York. It's Bloomberg surveillance.
Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, well, we've got red and green on the screen. S&P futures down about 0.1%. Dow futures, and there's little change in NASDAQ futures down 0.3%. Today, investors looking for more comments from central bank officials. We've already heard from Fed's Chris Waller. He said he needs to see several more months of good inflation figures to begin cutting interest rates. We'll head to the bond market. The 2-year yield at 4.83%. That's down a basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.41%, and that's down 3 basis points. To earnings we go. We'll start with Zoom Video Communications. Shares down 2%. The company reported first quarter results beat expectation, but here's the thing. It gave a second quarter forecast for adjusted earnings that was weaker than expected. That's why those shares are lower. Companies making news, that would be JP Morgan. CEO Jamie Dimon telling shareholders at its investor day that the bank is, quote, well on the way with its succession plans. And Apple, sources saying the company has challenged a £1.8 billion fine from the EU for preventing fair competition from music streaming rivals like Spotify. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate it. So this is great. Before the Pentagon, the largest building in the world was the United States Department of Commerce building. Our president, Hubert Hoover, used the same trowel they used on the Washington Monument to lay the first block, darkening the door of commerce. A number of years ago, an academic from the Upper East Side at the Council on Foreign Relations, Elizabeth Economy, went down to assist the governor of Rhode Island with Commerce Forward. Elizabeth Economy joins us right now. She's free from the clutches of our public service. What was the first day like at Commerce? Did they put a cork in your mouth and just say, be nice? What was the first day like?
I don't think they knew what to expect.
Yeah, exactly.
But honestly, there were only about 50 people working there at the time because it was right in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And the only people that were showing up for work were the secretary's kind of immediate 20 to 30 people on the 5th floor. So it was like a ghost town, but it was a great, great opportunity, and she's just fantastic.
And just to remind people, Elizabeth Economy, years ago out of Michigan, with The River Runs Black, it was just in a profoundly changing book on China's pollution right now, and a whole series of books along the way. I want to go to your foreign affairs blistering essay, and without going into the details within the confines of the length of this interview, what should the U.S. do? Are you allowed to say this now, or are you like in a timeout chair for 6 months after leaving?
No restrictions.
What should we
no restrictions on
How
me now.
do we respond to your blistering essay of China's plan?
I think the point that I was really trying to make in the piece was that the United States has done a really good job of responding in the first couple of years of the administration to the immediate challenge that China poses. But now we really need to expand to the global stage and pay attention to how China, through its Belt and Road Initiative, through its Global Civilization Initiative, its Security Initiative, its Development Initiative, all of these things are designed to transform the international system in ways that are antithetical to the U.S. And so that necessitates a new strategy, a kind of second-tier strategy from the United States, which is much more than simply focusing on our European and our Asian allies, but really expanding our tent to include emerging economies in Latin America and Africa and Southeast Asia, and bringing them into an American vision of the world for the 21st century.
I guess I grew up on global Wall Street, where globalization was the thing. That was my career. With China, should we try to engage with China? Should that be our first order of business, to try to engage with China? Or should we step back and say, this is almost like, I don't know, the Soviet Union from back in the day? I mean, how should we engage with China?
So I think for 35 years, we had 90% engagement, 10% competition.
Yep.
Right? Now we're basically at 90% competition and 10% engagement. I think actually, unfortunately, we've got it about right at this point. Okay. I think we need to understand that China's not interested in the kind of engagement that we've pursued for 30-some years. They have their own vision. They want their own norms, their own values, their own interests reflected on the global stage.
Your book, The Third Revolution, was my book of the summer, it seems ages ago, pandemic ago as well. In it, you were really controversial about the power that President Xi has in China. Has he solidified his power? Is he impregnable now?
I don't know whether anyone is impregnable. Certainly he's done an amazing job of bringing institutional power into his own hands. What we don't know is, how much his personal power actually radiates through society. What is the real legitimacy of Xi Jinping among the Chinese people? We have some polls, for example, that show that urban Chinese would really like to have greater freedom of speech. They'd really like, greater property rights, the right to assemble. I think you can look and see a lot of dissatisfaction in the country if you look beneath the surface. We don't have 180,000 protests on the streets the way we used to because Xi Jinping has put in place this incredible repressive apparatus. But that's not to say discontent is not still there.
The heart of the matter, and folks, I attended the Council on Foreign Relations where I'm a member of a very important conference by Gina Raimondo. I've got a business, Paul, as you mentioned, a business globalization structure debating China. And I've got a president of the United States worried about 4 swing states, so he's anti-China. And the candidate for the Republican Party, I believe, is anti-China as well. Are we able to have a cogent discussion on China now? Are we literally back to Chiang Kai-shek and the ballet post-World War II?
I think that we're able to have a cogent discussion, but the parameters have shifted so that there's a new realization about the real challenge that China presents. I think we don't want to go down the rabbit hole where everything is about competition. We need to do what the Biden administration started out to do, which is to look for areas of common ground and common purpose, to try to find communication channels on the military to military cooperation. We don't want this relationship to devolve into kinetic conflict. But it's also true that we recognize we can't continue that globalization without any protection for the American economy. You can argue whether we're swinging too far in one way. You can argue whether or not we actually have been very clear about what we're doing in terms of our economic strategy on the grounds of national security or economic competitiveness. I think we can do a better job there.
I'm running out of time. Can you make this a weekly appointment? Come on. Elizabeth economy, we've deployed 4 military bases in a new military effort from the northern Philippines down to somewhere in the vicinity of Indonesia. We've got to build out in Australia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is the Pentagon going to be our State Department to China in the next 5 years?
No, I think the Commerce Department has been our State Department to
listen,
China.
She's such a homer.
And good thing, too, because the Secretary is really the star. No, I mean, I think our economic strategy has...
Rich, is she still working for the government or not? Did I not get the memo?
No, I think again, we've enacted so many different kinds of new economic policies that have a pretty significant impact on China. I think that has been our first foot forward. But it's also true that if we're looking at issues like Taiwan, or as you're suggesting, the Philippines and the South China Sea, the military has to be front and center.
How alone is Nick Burns over there? A good friend of the show, Nicholas Burns out of Wellesley, and all of his public service as well. Is our State Department alone in Beijing?
No, I think he's done an amazing job of engaging, frankly, with our other ambassadors from our allies and partners. So he's got a lot of support, a lot of friends. I think in the earlier days of the pandemic, it was extremely difficult, but he's been an amazing ambassador.
Lisa wants to know, I mean, do you really think that high school kids now should pick up Mandarin as a third language? I mean,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We need the next generation of China scholars and China policymakers. We need people to be informed about this country. It's 1.3 some billion people, the second, largest economy, largest military. Why do we not want to be expert and
Everybody
informed?
wants to know, when's the new book? What are you doing here? You're just slacking off 6 hours a day. When's
I know,
the new
really,
book?
right?
Come on.
The polarized polity, looking at polarization in China, arguing that it's easily as
In
polarized.
domestic China.
Easily as polarized as the United States, and implications for China's future economic growth.
What's her name? Is Scarlett Johansson? Is that, how do you pronounce her name?
Scarlett
Johansson. Johansson.
I don't think she's going to be
sell the movie rights?
I don't think she's going to be starring
Scarlett's
as Xi Jinping anytime soon.
When does this tome come out?
Let's call it 2.5 years.
2.5 years from now, great. Elizabeth Economy, do not be a stranger. Her public service to the nation at Commerce, now ensconced at the Council on Foreign Relations, definitive on China. Look for her writings. I can't say enough about her first effort for Foreign Affairs magazine. Look for that. It's a blistering essay, a to-do list for America with China. Red and green on the screen to the market open. Nvidia tomorrow afternoon. Carol and Tim will have that for you. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. Now, we were just one day away from Nvidia earnings. Yesterday, its stock rose 2.8% in New York, sending the NASDAQ 100 index to another record high. So how will the markets react today? When you also add into that health factor, more Fed speak throughout the day. The markets are open. Let's get right to it right now. We'll start with the S&P 500. It's down about 0.1% at 5,298. We go to the Dow, little change, 39,825. And the NASDAQ, down 0.3%, 16,729. Over to the bond market, the 2-year yield, 4.82%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.40%, and that's down 4 basis points. Quick check of commodities. We have spot gold higher at $2,427 an ounce. Brent crude, $82 a barrel. WTI crude, $78 a barrel. At the opening bell, we want to check in with Nvidia shares. They are down 1%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. There's this raging debate about AI. I think everybody can hear my suspect tone to it. I just don't really know how it's going to change my life, what the software is going to be. And I guess, Paul, at the Apple meeting in June, we're going to be smarter.
I think we are. I think you need to get out there, Tom.
Well, I
get
can't.
Your front
but
page.
I got to dress like Ed Lowe. If I show up in a bow tie and a suit, they'd probably throw me out.
Yeah, that's not going to work. We're going to have
it's
to
not
do
going to work.
there.
I mean, joining us now, somebody that's really like looking at this day to day. Edward Ludlow joins us with Bloomberg Technology. And yesterday was really an extraordinary day. He got global play in this tech debate around Michael Dell, one of my favorite people at Dell of Texas, of Austin, Texas, a guy in a leather coat from Nvidia and a few other worthies as well. Ed Ludlow, first, what was the event you spearheaded yesterday?
Yeah, so I was in Las Vegas at Dell Technologies World, which is kind of Dell's historically less followed developers conference, but this time around, partly because of where Dell sits in this big AI story, but also because he had Nvidia CEO Jen-Hsun with him on stage, it was just really important event. And as you kind of alluded to, as soon as the kind of keynote was finished, Michael Dell walked off the stage with Jen-Hsun and Bill McDermott and straight up to me, and we sat down for 30 minutes.
And, I look at the AI debate, and there's all the believers out there, the true believers out there. What is their doubt? What's the proof of concept in AI over the next 6 months among the fancy people?
Yeah, the proof of concept is, in the first instance, that it's relevant beyond just the very small group of huge technology companies that run cloud infrastructure. So right now, all the billions of dollars that have been buying up chips and building data centers has just been a story about Nvidia selling to Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and maybe Meta. But beyond that, nothing's happening in middle America, small and medium enterprises. And then on the consumer side, I heard you talking about this, it's, you're not convinced, right? How do I use AI every day on my phone or on my laptop? And probably starting gun yesterday, those products are now on sale, devices that specifically are designed for you to interact with them using generative AI tools. But I think that you're right. There's a lot of skepticism out there that anyone beyond sort of the most tech au fait is ready for this.
So, Ed, just talk to us about kind of what Nvidia and Dell are doing, because when I think of Dell, obviously we all think of personal computers, but Dell's just been on the leading edge of consumer devices for such a long time. What does Nvidia and Dell getting together mean?
Yeah, it's really crucially important, especially because of Nvidia's earnings in just over 24 hours time, right? Michael Dell, very good at selling stuff, and they're very good at selling stuff to businesses, big and small, government agencies, public sector groups. When we talk about, Dell, many of your listeners will think, oh, I used to have a Dell desktop, or I used to have a Dell laptop, or whatever it might be. But actually, the mainstay of their business is they build servers. So they take NVIDIA's high-performance chips, their AI accelerators, the brains that do the compute behind designing artificial intelligence, and they package them up along with cabling, networking gear, and they stick them in very large offices, and they're really good at it. And what's important about the NVIDIA relationship is NVIDIA is on this just unbelievable ride. You got the stock. Jensen's never had to sell anything to anyone, let alone an SME, so he needs Michael Dell.
Okay, you're in Irvine, California. What does AI mean? How's it going to be applied at the University of California at Irvine? I think that's like just one basic idea. Don't tell me that it's going to be a different search engine than Google. Nobody cares because it works now. What is AI? What is Michael Dell going to do for UCI?
I'm in Irvine, California on a top secret project, which was not to be revealed and will be at a later date. But I think it's simply about efficiency and time. You know, when we're talking about generative AI tools, we're talking about chatbots. Me putting a text command prompt into a box and getting an answer back. Or I'm talking about automation. You know, you talk about UC Irvine, they have a large, for example, medical and biomedical department. You know, a big picture, a researcher sitting at their desk can basically get to the root of what they're looking for in terms of, you know, research breakthrough or drug discovery or genetic analysis quicker using generative AI technology than they'd previously been able to. And so I think it's just about getting a lot more done. But again, I have some skepticism in my voice. It sounds so easy. A lot of spending on expensive computers has to happen first.
Right. Again, one more question here, just because of the audio this morning. And folks, he's in Irvine, California, because he's checking out at Nep Cafe, the French Vietnamese coffee. That's why he's in Irvine right now. Ed Ludlow, take us all forward to the Apple meeting in June. Paul Sweeney's making a big deal about this. Dan Ives is foaming at the mouth. Is it really going to be a big deal when you attend that?
It probably is going to be a big deal because Apple has kept its cards close to its chest. You know, again, very simple. Tom, I think you're an iPhone user, right? I'm an iPhone user. There is no publicly stated, here is what AI looks like on the iPhone yet. Everyone else has done it. You know, we know what AI-capable smartphones on Android look like. The whole point of Dell yesterday was they introduced 5 different PCs that are AI-enabled, that have specific AI hardware. Apple's not done that yet. And based on Mark Gurman's reporting at Bloomberg News and all what I'm hearing, Apple will finally show its hand. And the investors really need it to. I think there's a lot of concern that they haven't got to this earlier.
Well, Ed Ludlow, thank you so much, and thank you for driving the conversation forward with Michael Dell and company yesterday. Nice. Of course, the show is Bloomberg Technology. To me, Irvine is just that place out of LAX.
Yes,
I mean, I'm like the East Coast idiot. You know,
my son just moved from Denver to LA, and he's just like, oh my God, this is a huge place. How do you get around it?
It's huge.
There you go, my friend.
It is.
Good luck with that.
You know,
there is no LA. There's this. It's just out there. It's stuff. It's all over the place.
No, it's
SoCal.
Out. It's like the only equivalent. I think Oklahoma City is sort of the same way, but it's just like it's like everywhere. And they go like the minimum Uber drive I think I've ever taken there's $100 because like you go, it's next door, and by New York standards, it's like Central New Jersey.
Right. Right.
And there's that whole thing is, well, I mean, what are we setting up for with Nvidia tomorrow? Are we going to see this thing go down 40%?
Interesting, Tom. Yeah, that'll be interesting. I mean,
I'm trying to create some tension here. I got to build the ratings for Carol and Tim.
Well, Carol and Tim, yeah, they'll break it down for us tomorrow right at the close like they do here. But again, this company for the last 4 quarters has had very, very high expectations.
Yeah.
And they've kind of hit it every time. And this, you see it in the stock just rocking and rolling. And Jen-Hsun Huang has become a very wealthy person over the last 12 to 18 months, thanks to the rise in the stock price there.
But it goes to all the CapEx plans of Hollywood and entertainment. We talk about Irvine or Hollywood or whatever. And 3-4 years ago, everybody was going to do a gajillion square feet of production studios and all that in Hollywood. I really wonder where that is 12 months from now.
Yeah,
I just don't know.
I don't know. And, we'll see. You have one of the major handful of studios in the world up for sale here at Paramount, and seemingly they can't give it away here. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I'm following, Lucas Shaw at Bloomberg News. I'll follow his reporting, and he'll break it, I'm sure, and have the latest.
Out on YouTube, the live chat. Thank you for the live chat on YouTube. Irvine, Newport Beach is a beautiful place, and we learned that earlier this week. Anthony Crescenzi surfing at Pimco at the Wedge.
Exactly.
It's more challenging than what I would do, but it's God's country. Down to Laguna Beach. And,
There's smart people out there. They're not just bond geeks.
They get up early, though. I mean,
they do. That's a great point, Tom. They got to get. I mean, the bond market. Bond people start kind of getting busy around 7 a.m. Wall Street time, and that's 4 a.m.
I'm trying to get Bill Gross on. I don't, Bill, if you're listening, we're trying to get you on. Talk to your people. My people talk to your people, and that as well. I got a pre-Nvidia churning screen.
Right.
That's all there is. What's going to be the slowest trading day of the year?
It's been kind of calm here. And Tom, your VIX is sitting right at 12. Shouldn't it be at like 20 or something? I don't know.
Euro yen, we haven't even mentioned. Euro yen, 169.52 like a rock. Really hasn't printed through 170 weaker yen, but that's something for the Pacific Rim. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Testimony continues for defense witness Robert Costello at Donald Trump's hush money trial in Manhattan. Yesterday was an explosive day in the trial. Trump's legal team called Costello, a lawyer who advised Trump fixer Michael Cohen. However, the judge became furious and eventually cleared the courtroom over Costello's behavior. Judge Marchand called Costello's behavior contemptuous. Former President Donald Trump has reached a fundraising milestone in this election cycle. Bloomberg's Jody Snyder has more on April fundraising from Washington.
He has now, for the first time in this election cycle, raised more money than Joe Biden. Although the current president, Joe Biden's campaign, still holds a wide financial lead over Donald Trump. But he did raise more money, raised $76 million in April, and that was to Biden's $51 million.
Bloomberg's Jody Schneider reports President Biden still has more than twice as much cash on hand as the former president at $192 million. In Iran, the funeral of the late president has begun. Thousands of people line the streets of the northwestern city of Tabriz as the coffins of President Ibrahim Raisi and 7 members of his entourage were driven by. Another funeral service will be held in the holy city of Qom tonight, and then the bodies will be moved to the Iranian capital, Tehran. Iran's heads of government have set June 28th as the date for the election of a new president. Meanwhile, speaking on the floor, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell noted the history of the country leaves him little hope that the relationship between the U.S. and the next Iranian president will be any better.
The untimely death of the president of Iran does not change the underlying threats this regime poses to its own citizens, to its region, and to the free world.
Iran's recovery teams reported the weather conditions were very poor in the region where the wreckage was found in Iran's rural mountains. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
And to carry right off that, Paul, I know you're going to tell us about Mr. Gurr's appearance here in a moment, but the big take yesterday was a very nice, cogent summary of Iran forward. We got that from Golnar Montevalli, and Ariel Cohen, I thought, was brilliant yesterday. On to give us a briefing on that.
Yeah, I guess what I learned, it's the president obviously has a significant role in the country, but really it's up to the Ayatollah for the big issues for that country, and there's no change there.
We're going to get a good briefing on this coming up as well. Our briefing on the data is simple. Red and green on the screen, the VIX 12.37, the real yield, the 10-year real yield, 2.08%, really pretty much unched over the last 2-3 days. Of course, a huge anticipation that we'll see off of Jen-Hsun Wang's conversation with Ed Ludlow yesterday. We'll see that with Nvidia tomorrow. Currencies churning as well. Again, I'm watching Euro Yen at a 170 rounded up. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. The stock market fluctuated near all-time highs. Traders awaited Nvidia's earnings, waded through remarks from a bunch of Federal Reserve speakers. Right now, we have the Nasdaq down 0.3% at 16,729. The Dow, little change at 39,835, and we have the S&P 500 down 0.1% at 5,302. Over to the bond market, the two-year yield 4.82%, down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.41%, and that's down 3 basis points. Checking in with shares of Lowe's, they're down nearly 2%. Yeah, the company beat estimates after a boost from professional contractors despite the weak housing market, but those shares lower right now. And then we have Macy's, they're up about 2.5%, raised its outlook for the remainder of the year after beating profit estimates. And then you make a turn to software. Palo Alto, they're down nearly 6%, gave a downbeat forecast, and that's sparking some concerns about a slowdown in cybersecurity services. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. The Big Take. It's a longer podcast than Single Best Idea because it's a smarter person joining us. David Gura, host of the Big Take podcast, which every day has a different theme. And when the news flow changes, David Gura changes. So there you were, like all of us, in shock Saturday, Sunday night with these deaths in Iran, the emotion there. I mean, some of the comments in the mourning of these people and saying we shouldn't mourn for these people. You know, just part of it is, what tack did you take in piecing together your podcast on Iran?
Well, Sarah Holder, who also hosts the show, and I split the show in half. She focused on sort of what the reaction was within Iran and what it means for Iranian domestic politics, and I looked at kind of the broader meaning for the world, what it means for international relations. And so the part in which I looked, we noted the fact that President Biden came onto the job wanting to resurface the nuclear deal that was in place that President Trump scrapped, kind of charted the fact that that hasn't changed yet and is unlikely to. This is just another kind of nail in that coffin. But looked at sort of what had been achieved, yes, by this president who died in the helicopter crash, but by the foreign minister as well. He was so integrally involved, Tom, in this deal that was brokered between Iran and Saudi Arabia after this 7-year freeze, a very fragile détente. He died in this plane crash as well. That was done with the help of China. So it's a funny story in that this is a pivotal moment, yes. 2 very senior members of this administration have died tragically in this helicopter crash. But there's also the sense that we got from Ross Matheson in London, Nick Wadhams in D.C., both of our bureaus there, that things will fundamentally likely stay the same, that you have a supreme leader who's, yes, very aged, but he's divined what's going to happen here, and it's likely to stay the course.
But going back to 1979, which you're way too young to remember, David Gura, but you know, the basic idea here is a theocracy in place, and we have no way to get back to our hope or our desire or the ephemeral illusion of the Pahlavi days of royal or even of, dare I say, some form of structured democracy. That's all out the window, right?
That feels far away, but every time something like this happens, where there's something anomalous that happens in this country's history, there is a wonder about what could happen. And so I think we're at that point as well. You know, as I said, the supreme leader now in his late 80s, the president who died was seen as widely in the running, likely to be perhaps the next supreme leader of that country. That's all thrown up in the air. So to go to Sarah Holder's portion of the show, of the podcast, she focused on that, sort of what this means for the jockeying internally for who's going to replace the person who really is calling the shots in Iran. And so one wonders if an event like this can create something of a power vacuum, can create some sort of opening for the dissent that we have seen more in recent years to grow into something bigger. I don't think that anybody's expecting that to happen, but it is, yes, another opening where something like that could take place, Tom.
I think I probably represent more than a few people who, when you look at this event, you're saying, all right, let me step back. What do the Iranian people want? What do we know about the Iranian people? Because they don't seem that far from wanting to engage, and we see that from every once in a while. What do we know about the
It's a great question, and we've seen this movement toward, at least in the government level, to a more hardline stance that hasn't been matched by the people in Iran. It's a very good point, Paul. And so what we're looking at now is this mourning period that's going to be followed by a special election, an unexpected election to elect the next president. And what we've seen, this is our best metric of this, is how voter participation has diminished in these last recent years. So you have a supreme leader who, yes, is extremely hardline and has sort of cultivated relationships with politicians who favor him or mirror him or aren't going to challenge him. And as a result of that, you have a lot of everyday Iranians who feel disenchanted by or disillusioned with the political process in that country. And that's a problem for Iran, frankly, because there's always been this veneer that it is a democracy, there are elections, people can participate. And if you see that level of participation continue to diminish, I mean, woefully low participation in the last parliamentary election, that has to indicate to you that, like, this ain't working the way that it used to.
Do we have any reason to believe that, again, the death of the president and foreign minister will impact the region? Because, boy, it's a fragile time in that region, and Iran is right smack in the middle of it. When you think about it, Israel and Gaza and all that.
It's something that I think we're going to continue to watch extremely closely. So I mentioned Saudi Arabia in that deal. These countries are talking again in a way that they hadn't been. Obviously, this is happening within this wider crucible. And we had just last month Iran launching this unprecedented attack. Iran launching this unprecedented attack on Israel. So that's all swirling here. We'll see sort of how much that fragile cohesion holds. But I think it's a great question, one that just bears watching closely here again as we go through this period of mourning.
What are you working on today? I mean, is it top secret, or can you give us a hint here?
It's top secret, but
I mean, you're sliding in at 9:52.
I'm sliding. Yes. Well, I must confess, I was worried when I saw Katie Greifeld here and she was talking about makeup in the show. Should I be getting makeup?
Oh yeah,
hair and makeup.
Yeah, we do.
I screened a call from her agent after I saw what happened when he called last time. But no, I'm thinking of next week wandering down to 100 Center Street in Lower Manhattan. I haven't attended the proceedings of the former president, but obviously we're expecting a verdict to come next week after the Memorial Day holiday. We haven't touched on that in recent days on the show, and I think that there is something with Tim O'Brien and others we could have next week.
Asking for a friend, surveillance congestion tax correspondent John Tucker. You're in Brooklyn. He's with all the beautiful people in Brooklyn.
That's where the kids are.
I keep trying to get you down there.
Land with, $300 bridges.
Right? Three bridges.
How are you going to get to the office with the congestion tax? Do you go north of Queens and go up by LaGuardia and then come over?
Look, I'm a workaday guy, Tom. I'm taking that train, but congestion pricing, will be a factor. I usually, when I come to Manhattan by car, I do take the tunnel, and it looks like it's going to be. I was kind of wondering, jokingly, as we've seen this kind of parade of Republican politicians coming to this trial, if we had congestion pricing in place, we could really do wonders for the city budget.
So that's a secret big take they're working on.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to get this trial done before the congestion.
Before that goes into effect. I mean, it's a sizable amount of money. I mean, the tunnel's not cheap, is it? Far from me to grouse, but anyway.
No. And it's, $15 to come into the city. That'll get your attention one way or the other.
These are things you don't have to worry about, Tom, from your perch
on
high here,
that's
northern side of Central Park.
I haven't been below 59th Street, or 57th Street, I should say. I think it was like the third week of March.
Yeah, everything you need is
under duress. It was like the DMV or something. You had to get down there for that.
Yep. David Gura, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Paul. Can't say enough about what's the typical length of the big take? Is it 20 minutes?
We're shooting for 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, and there were some of these daily news podcasts that are longer, but I think that we've found it's a nice length for people who are commuting or just want to get again. The goal here is context and to show the breadth of this amazing newsroom, which spans the globe, and certainly as they should show that.
Day after day. I mean, how do they come? Who's in charge? These things, you don't just pop them out at your desk.
No, this is beyond my pay grade, but I am astonished day in and day out by just the quality of the work.
Did you listen to the show earlier? I was hyping Cornell mathematics.
I appreciate that.
Geometry.
Yes.
You were in torsional geometry
for a hot minute. I think. I realized it wasn't the English department, and I took a turn right inside the classroom.
Thank you so much, mathematician here. Look for that on the Big Take, of course, and subscribe to the Big Take out on Apple Podcasts if you can.
Seriously.
And so we did older songs today. So I said I'd do a song Gura's never heard.
Yep.
And so this song was just like a ginormous song. In 1966, everybody's covered it. And David mentioned to me he loves the Everclear cover that did as well. And I'm sorry, it's like we did Dave Clark 5 earlier and the Kinks. You remember?
Yep, love the Kinks.
This is early stuff. I mean, the only one in the building that knows these songs is John Tucker. And John Tucker, when he was a kid, he wanted a ponytail like Paul Revere and the Raiders. Yeah. That's what they did.
Good look like that.
Paul Revere and the Raiders, Kicks. Good morning.
But when you wake up in the morning, the world still gets you uptight. Well, there's nothing better you ain't tried to fill the emptiness inside. this ain't bringing you peace of mind. Before you find out it's too late, girl, you better get straight.